King's Landing. 292 AC. King's Landing. Third person POV. A full year has passed since the grand tourney at Dragonhold, a week of splendor that had showcased the unity and prosperity of the Seven Kingdoms. The realm, under the firm hand of King Maekar Targaryen, was at peace, a quiet hum of progress filling the air where once there had been the clamor of war. King Maekar sat upon the Iron Throne, a formidable figure in the vastness of the Great Hall. The court was in session, a daily affair where the king addressed the myriad concerns of his sprawling kingdom. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, creating a serene, almost detached, atmosphere. Today, the discussions revolved around various land disputes and trade tariffs. Lord Arryn was petitioning for a new trade agreement with the Stepstones, while a minor lord from the Stormlands complained about a disputed fishing weir with his neighbor. King Maekar listened intently, his expression stern but fair, offering precise judgments and delegating tasks to his various counselors. The Kingsguard, 50 strong and gleaming in their white cloaks, stood vigilant, their presence a silent testament to the crown's unwavering security. 2 Kingsguard flanked the Iron Throne itself, their eyes sweeping the hall, missing nothing. "Your Grace," began Lord Estermont, a stout lord from the Stormlands, stepping forward from the assembled nobility. "The matter of the disputed fishing weir between my lands and those of House Myrtens remains unresolved. Their fishermen continue to trespass, depleting my waters." King Maekar listened, his gaze steady. "Lord Estermont, I have reviewed the letters from your Seneschal and Lord Myrtens's reports. The maps provided by Dragonhold scholars clearly show the traditional fishing boundaries, established during the reign of King Daeron the Good. Lord Myrtens's actions are indeed a transgression." He turned his head slightly towards Prince Aelor Targaryen, his hand. "Prince Aelor, dispatch a royal decree to Lord Myrtens. He is to cease all fishing operations within the clearly delineated boundaries of Lord Estermont's lands immediately. Any further transgression will be met with a fine of 200 dragons and a month's suspension of his fishing fleet." Prince Aelor nodded, already making a mental note. "It shall be done, Your Grace." Lord Estermont bowed deeply, relief evident on his face. "Thank you, Your Grace. Your wisdom is a true boon to the realm." Next, King Maekar commanded, his voice clear, "Lord Tarly. Your petition regarding the trade tariffs with the Stepstones." Lord Tarly stepped forward, a scroll in his hand. "Your Grace, the current tariff on textiles exported from Hornhill to the Stepstones remains prohibitive. It stifles commerce and impacts the prosperity of our merchants. We believe a reduction of 5% would greatly stimulate trade without significantly impacting crown revenue." King Maekar nodded, considering. "Prince Arion, Lord of the Stepstones, your thoughts on this?" "Your kingdom relies on this trade." Prince Arion, from his seat among the royal family, replied, "Your Grace, while a reduction might initially impact our immediate revenue, Lord Tarly speaks truly of stimulation. My own reports from the Stepstones indicate that the current tariff discourages larger shipments. A slight reduction could lead to a greater volume of trade, ultimately benefiting both our treasuries." "A valid point," King Maekar mused. "Master Wyler, have you calculations on the projected increase in trade volume should this tariff be reduced?" Before Master Wyler could reply, a subtle stir occurred near the foot of the dais. An acolyte, young and nervous, dressed in the simple black robes of the Master of Communications service, approached the Master of Communications seat. Master Wyler, a man of advanced years with a neatly trimmed white beard and sharp, intelligent eyes, was listening to a plea from a merchant's guild. The acolyte moved swiftly, extending a sealed letter, its wax bearing the distinctive three-headed dragon sigil of Dragonstone. Master Wyler, accustomed to receiving countless missives, took the letter with a practiced ease. He broke the seal, unfolded the parchment, and began to read. His eyes scanned the familiar script, his brow furrowing slightly as he processed the words. Then, imperceptibly at first, a change came over his demeanor. His posture stiffened. The slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hands began. His eyes, usually so steady, widened, a flicker of disbelief, then a dawning horror, seizing them. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly pale. His breath seemed to catch in his throat. He read the letter again, more frantically this time, as if hoping the words would change, but they remained etched in ink, stark and terrifying. A low, strangled gasp escaped his lips. The Merchants Guild representative, who had been speaking, trailed off, sensing the Master of Communications' sudden, profound distress. The quiet hum of the court seemed to amplify the silence around the Master of Communications' panic. With a trembling hand, Master Wyler turned, his gaze fixed on the seated figure of Prince Aelor Targaryen, King Maekar's brother and the hand of the king. Aelor was a man of quiet wisdom, accustomed to the subtle intrigues of court, but rarely given to overt displays of emotion. Master Weiler held out the letter, his hand shaking so violently that the parchment rattled. He tried to speak, but only a choked sound emerged from his throat. Prince Aylor, seeing the Master of Communications' extreme distress, frowned. He took the letter, his brow furrowing as he noticed the urgency in Weiler's eyes. He quickly unfolded the parchment and began to read. As Aylor's eyes scanned the message, his own composure began to crack. His face, usually so calm, blanched. A bead of sweat, then another, trickled down his temple, despite the cool air of the hall. His hand, holding the letter, began to tremble uncontrollably. His breathing hitched. He reread the message, his eyes darting frantically across the page, as if he could somehow disbelieve the stark reality of the words. His shoulders slumped, and a look of utter terror, raw and unconcealed, spread across his face. The usual confidence in his eyes was replaced by wide, fearful disbelief. Prince Aylor, utterly terrified, no longer caring for courtly decorum, stood abruptly. He stumbled slightly, his legs almost giving way beneath him. His gaze was fixed on the imposing figure of King Maekar on the Iron Throne. He hurried, almost ran, towards the dais, his movements clumsy and desperate. The parchment, now crumpled in his hand, seemed to vibrate with the terrifying news it contained. Your Grace, Prince Aylor choked out, his voice hoarse with panic, his eyes wide with an unspeakable dread. He thrust the letter into King Maekar's hand, his own trembling. Your Grace, you must see this. From Dragonstone. King Maekar, accustomed to the calm, efficient delivery of news from his hand, sensed the immense gravity of the situation. He took the letter, his brow furrowing in a deep frown. His eyes quickly scanned the message from Dragonstone. As he read, the last vestiges of his usual stern composure vanished. His face transformed, hardening into a grim, unyielding mask, a shadow of concern settling over his features. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving him pale, his jaw clenched tight. He looked up, his gaze sweeping over the court, his eyes cold and distant. This court is dismissed. King Maekar's voice boomed, cutting through the murmurs that had begun to rise from the shocked assembly. His voice brooked no argument, no delay. Immediately, everyone, away from the hall. The abruptness of the king's command, coupled with his grim demeanor and Prince Aylor's terrified state, sent a ripple of confusion and alarm through the court. Lords and ladies whispered, exchanging bewildered glances, but they obeyed. The great hall quickly emptied, leaving only the king, his hand, and the silent, watchful Kingsguard. King Maekar, his face still grim, turned to a Kingsguard captain. Send word, he commanded, his voice tight with urgency. Every Targaryen member in the Red Keep. Those of age. I require them in the meeting room. Now. Immediately. The Kingsguard captain bowed and moved swiftly, relaying the king's urgent summons. The Red Keep, which had been a hive of activity just moments before, now resonated with a tense, hurried silence as the royal family was summoned. After a tense, anxious while, the meeting room began to fill. One by one, every adult Targaryen member in the Red Keep arrived, their faces etched with concern, their Kingsguard remaining outside the chamber doors. Prince Rhaegar and Prince Baelor were there, their faces serious. Princess Raelle is now seated. King Maekar's brothers, Prince Aylor and Prince Aerion, were already present, Aylor still visibly shaken. Even the younger adult Targaryens, cousins and distant kin, quickly gathered, sensing the unusual gravity of the summons. King Maekar stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid. He did not waste time with pleasantries. His eyes, though still holding a trace of fear, were now filled with a grim determination. A letter arrived this morning, King Maekar announced, his voice clipped and stark, cutting through the anticipation in the room. From Dragonstone. From the Dragonkeepers. He paused, taking a deep, fortifying breath. The silence in the room was absolute, every Targaryen leaning forward, hanging on his next words. All the wild dragons, King Maekar revealed, his voice strained, a tremor running through it despite his efforts to control it, have gone away. They flew. All of them. At once. We do not know where. The words landed like a physical blow. A collective gasp, then a wave of stunned silence, followed by an explosion of panicked voices. Gone. Prince Rhaegar exclaimed, his face paling. All of them. That's impossible. The wild dragons. Prince Baelor stammered, his eyes wide with disbelief and dawning terror. But, why? Where could they have gone? Princess Raelle's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes fixed on her father, her expression horrified. Prince Aylor, already terrified, merely nodded, his face confirming the dreadful news. Prince Aerion looked utterly bewildered, his usual martial confidence gone. The room erupted into a cacophony of panicked guesses and questions. Did someone steal them? Were they driven off? They wouldn't just leave. Prince Aylor finally managed to say, his voice shaking. There must be a reason. A powerful reason for them to have flown away all at once. It's unprecedented. King Maekar slammed a fist on the table, the sharp crack silencing the room. His face was grim, but a steely resolve had begun to replace his earlier panic. We need to know why, King Maekar stated, his voice now firm, resolute. And we need to know where. Immediately. He looked at his sons, his brothers, his family. Send scouts. Send dragon riders. Send letters to every corner of the world. To the north, to the east, across the Sunset Sea. We need eyes everywhere. We need to know where our dragons are. This is not a matter for rumor or speculation, King Maekar concluded, his voice unwavering, filled with renewed authority. This is a matter for House Targaryen. We will find our dragons. And we will understand why they left. This realm cannot afford to lose its most potent symbol of power. Not now. Not ever. The meeting, filled with dread and urgency, quickly turned to action. The hunt for the lost dragons had begun. 2 comments 0 vote. Winterfell. 292 AC. Winterfell. Third-person POV. The Solar of Winterfell, a chamber carved from ancient grey stone, offered a sanctuary of quiet warmth against the perpetual northern chill. A roaring fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows upon the rich tapestries depicting direwolves and ancient battles. The scent of pine and old parchment mingled in the air, creating an atmosphere of thoughtful contemplation. Seated around a heavy oak table, etched with centuries of use, were the Stark men. At the head sat King Rickard Stark, his gaze steady and wise. He was the king of Asgard and a man who carried the weight of kingdom with quiet strength. To his right sat his eldest son and heir, Prince Brandon Stark. Brandon radiated an intensity that set him apart. His mind, a whirlwind of innovation, seemed to be perpetually at work, even in repose. His posture was alert, his eyes, dark as the deepest lake, missed nothing. Beside Brandon sat Prince Eddard Stark, his younger brother. Eddard was a man of quiet honor, his face thoughtful, his movements measured. He was the embodiment of northern steadfastness, a stark contrast to Brandon's restless brilliance, yet equally formidable in his own way. The third son, Prince Benjen Stark, sat opposite Eddard. Benjen was the most eager of the three, his spirit yearning for purpose beyond the castle walls. His eyes held a youthful enthusiasm, though tempered by the discipline of a warrior. The conversation that morning flowed easily, a familiar rhythm of family and duty. They spoke of the recent trip to Winterhold and of the students' feats of skill, and the camaraderie forged between young lords. Benjen, King Rickard began, his voice a low rumble, the spring thaw is upon us. Your decision to join the Night's Watch, still firm. Benjen nodded, his expression resolute. Aye, father, it is. I've spoken with the members of the Watch. I mean to ride for the Wall in a moon's turn. My heart is set on it. Eddard looked at his younger brother, a touch of sadness in his eyes, but also understanding. It will be a lonely vigil, Benjen. Perhaps, Ned, Benjen replied, a thoughtful frown creasing his brow. But the vows remain, and a Stark should always be there, just in case. Brandon, who had been listening intently, offered a rare, slight smile. You'll make the Watch proud, Benjen. And you'll have the fastest way to send messages in the world. Just send letters from time to time. Benjen chuckled. I will, brother. You've certainly changed the world with those inventions. King Rickard then turned to Brandon. How are Hadrian, Barthogen, and young Cregan doing, Brandon? Hadrian must be eager for Winterhold. Brandon's eyes softened. Hadrian speaks of little else, father. He pores over the Winterhold curriculum like a scholar obsessed. He'll be off in a few moons, full of questions for their engineers. Barthogen is a wild thing, as always, Brandon continued, a hint of pride in his voice. He spends more time in the training yard than his tutors would like. A fine warrior, but stubborn as a winter rock. And young Cregan? Eddard asked, a fond smile on his face. Still silent, that one. Brandon nodded. More so than ever. He watches, always. Sees everything. A sharp mind, a keen eye. He'll be a quiet force, that one. As the conversation settled into a comfortable lull, a sudden, sharp rap echoed through the heavy oak door of the Solar. The unexpected knock broke the tranquility, drawing all eyes towards the entrance. It was unusual for them to be interrupted in such a private meeting. Enter, King Rickard commanded, his brow furrowed slightly in mild surprise. The door creaked open, and a young scholar in the service of House Stark stepped inside. He was not a maester, for their order had long been dismantled, but a scholar trained at Winterhold, dressed in simple, practical northern academic robes. His face was pale, and he clutched a sealed parchment in his trembling hand. Your Grace, the scholar, his voice tight with urgency, a message. From the south. It arrived via Raven from King's Landing just moments ago. He held out the scroll, its wax seal bearing the distinctive, dreaded image of a three-headed dragon, the sigil of House Targaryen. The sight of it, delivered with such visible distress by the scholar, immediately heightened the tension in the room. This was not a regular missive. King Rickard's expression shifted instantly from mild curiosity to grave concern. He took the message, his fingers brushing the cool wax seal. He broke it cleanly, unrolling the parchment. His eyes scanned the neatly written words, his jaw tightening with each line. As he read, a chilling transformation came over King Rickard's face. His usual calm dissolved, replaced by a grim pallor that spread from his lips to his brow. His eyes, usually so steady, narrowed, a flicker of disbelief, then a dawning comprehension, seizing them. A silent, unsettling dread settled over him. He finished reading, his hand clenching the parchment. Without a word, his gaze fixed on Eddard, who sat closest to him. He handed the letter across the table, his hand trembling almost imperceptibly. "Read this, Eddard," King Rickard commanded, his voice a low, strained whisper, barely audible above the crackling fire. The scholar, having delivered his ominous message, bowed quickly and retreated, closing the door softly behind him. The air in the solar thickened, charged with unspoken fear. Eddard, sensing the terrible weight of the message, took the parchment. His eyes quickly scanned the words. As he read, his own face blanched. His eyes widened in shock, then tightened with profound worry. "Father," Eddard whispered, his voice incredulous, "it says, the dragons are missing." He read the key passage aloud, his voice trembling. "All the wild dragons from Dragonstone have gone away. Flown, we know not where." Benjen, listening intently, gasped. His own face turned pale. "Missing. All of them. But, how? Why?" He looked from Eddard's shocked face to King Rickard's grim, unyielding expression. But Brandon Stark, seated across from them, remained unsettlingly calm. His posture was rigid, his face a mask of cold, almost detached, composure. His eyes, though fixed on the letter, held no visible shock, no panic. It was as if he had always known such a day might come. His presence was a stark, unwavering pillar in the face of the sudden dread. Then, Benjen's eyes, wide with sudden realization, darted to Brandon. "Brandon," he exclaimed, his voice sharp with urgency. "Our wild dragons. What about our wild dragons? Are they all present?" The thought that their own ice dragons might have vanished sent a fresh wave of terror through him. Brandon, without opening his eyes, simply closed them, a subtle shift in his demeanor. His breathing deepened, becoming slower, more deliberate. A faint, almost imperceptible blue glow seemed to emanate from him, a subtle ripple of power that only his family could sense. He was reaching out, not with words, but with his mind. Connecting to Winter, his bonded ice dragon, and through Winter, to the others of their kind that lay at Long Lake. A moment of hushed tension filled the room. Eddard and Benjen watched Brandon with bated breath, their fears hanging heavy in the air. King Rickard, too, waited, his gaze fixed on his eldest son, trusting in the ancient bond. After a long, drawn-out moment, Brandon's eyes slowly opened. The subtle blue glow faded. His face remained cold, but a flicker of grim certainty entered his gaze. "They are," Brandon stated, his voice a low, steady rumble, cutting through the silence. "All of them. Winter confirms it. Our wild dragons are present. Accounted for." A collective sigh of relief, ragged and audible, escaped Eddard and Benjen. The tension that had held them rigid seemed to deflate, leaving them momentarily weak. King Rickard's shoulders visibly relaxed, a deep breath escaping his lips. The North's ancient guardians, at least, were safe. King Rickard, though relieved, quickly regained his composure, his mind already racing, shifting from personal fear to the broader implications for the realm. He looked at his sons, his voice firm, infused with new urgency. "This changes everything," King Rickard stated, his voice grim. "The Targaryen dragons are gone. And their prophecy, this is no longer a distant whisper." He turned to Eddard and Brandon. "Send telegrams. To every northern house. To every lord, every castle, every port along the coasts. They are to message us immediately if they see a dragon. Any dragon. Anywhere. And if it's the wild dragons from Dragonstone, they are to report their location, their direction, and any sign of behavior. We need to know where they have gone. We need to know why." Eddard and Brandon nodded, their faces now grimly resolute. Benjen, though his future had just been altered, looked at his brothers, a renewed purpose in his eyes. "It will be done, father," Brandon stated, his voice clear. Without another word, the three sons rose from the table. The conversation about Benjen's joining the Night's Watch was forgotten, overshadowed by this far graver news. They had their duties. The unknown had just knocked on the door of Westeros, and the Starks, as always, would be the first to prepare. The long night, it seemed, was truly coming. 2 comments 0 vote. Reactions. 292 AC. Third person POV. In the formidable, golden-hued fortress of Castle Rock, Lord Tywin Lannister, Warden of the West, sat in his solar. The telegram, bearing the urgent Targaryen three-headed dragon sigil, lay flat on his polished desk. Its Stark message had arrived mere hours after King Maekar's court was dismissed, a speed unimaginable a century ago. Tywin's face, usually a mask of granite resolve, was grim. He reread the message, his eyes, sharp and calculating, absorbing every word. Wild dragons, gone. All of them. Flew away. No trace. He clenched his jaw, the muscle ticking in his cheek. This was not merely a curious event, this was a cataclysm. Dragons were the ultimate symbol of Targaryen power, the very foundation upon which their golden age was built. Their disappearance, especially all at once, spoke of an unknown, terrifying force at work. His daughter, Cersei, wife to Prince Baelor Targaryen, was still in King's Landing, having witnessed the panic firsthand. He knew she would relay every detail. But the impact of the letter was chilling. Kevin, Tywin called, his voice flat, but the underlying tension clear. His brother, Sir Kevin Lannister, a man of unwavering loyalty and quiet competence, entered, bowing. Yes, brother, Kevin acknowledged, his expression attentive. What troubles you? Tywin pushed the telegram across the desk. Read this. From King's Landing. Kevin picked up the parchment, his eyes quickly scanning the contents. His brow furrowed as he read, his usual calm demeanor giving way to a look of profound disbelief, then concern. The wild dragons, Kevin murmured, looking up at Tywin. All 20 of them gone. It beggars belief. Indeed, Tywin stated, leaning back in his chair, his gaze fixed on his brother. And it changes everything. The crown's strength, its very legitimacy, is rooted in those beasts. Without them, even the Golden Age begins to look tarnished. Kevin nodded slowly. This is unprecedented. No single entity, no known force, could simply make 20 dragons vanish. Precisely, Tywin said, a cold, predatory flicker entering his eyes. Which leaves us with 2 possibilities. Either a force beyond our current understanding, or a very clever enemy we have yet to discern. Regardless, the Targaryens have lost their greatest asset. Their ultimate deterrent. He rose, walking to the window that overlooked the bustling city of Lannisport, thinking of the vast wealth beneath his feet. Send word to all our bannermen, Kevin. Double patrols along the coast and in the hills. Ensure vigilance. Any unusual sightings in the sky, any strange phenomena, are to be reported immediately. Kevin nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. To bolster our own strength, brother. And to weather any storm. And to ensure that if the foundations of power shift, Tywin concluded, his voice low and dangerous, House Lannister is ready to seize whatever advantage presents itself. The Lannisters always pay their debts. And they always watch for opportunity. In the verdant, sun-drenched splendor of Highgarden, the seat of House Tyrell, the news arrived with a jarring abruptness. Lord Mace Tyrell, portly and fond of grand gestures, received the letter while overseeing the arrangements for a new fountain. His usual booming laughter died in his throat as he read the message. Mother, Mace exclaimed, rushing to the side of Lady Olenna Tyrell, the formidable Queen of Thorns, who sat in her garden, tending to her prize roses. Olenna, sharp-witted and cynical, fixed her gaze on her son. What now, you oaf? She snapped, though her eyes held a flicker of concern at his pallor. Have you broken another lance trying to impress a maiden? Worse, mother. Far worse. Mace stammered, handing her the telegram. The wild dragons. They're gone. All of them from Dragonstone. Olenna's sharp eyes scanned the message. Her usual playful smirk vanished, replaced by a grim line. Gone. All of them, she repeated, her voice low. Curious. Very curious. That's not good, Mace. Not good at all. She looked up at the sky, then back at her son. The Targaryens have ruled on the back of those beasts for generations. This could sow immense instability. What does Maekar say? He just demands we look for them, Mace replied, still flustered. And asks for vigilance. Vigilance, indeed, Olenna muttered, plucking a dead rose petal. It means he's worried, and when the Targaryens are worried, everyone else should be terrified. This golden age of theirs, it rests on dragon wings. What happens when the wings are clipped? She stood, her movements surprisingly agile for her age. Send letters to all our bannermen. Double patrols. And tell the reapers to work faster. We need full granaries, Mace. A long winter sometimes comes from unexpected directions. She had seen too much history repeat itself not to be wary. At Storm's End, the ancient, unyielding fortress, the news of the missing dragons arrived from Rhael Targaryen to Lord Robert Baratheon. Robert, a man of booming laughter and hearty appetites, was in the midst of a hunt when the message reached him. He read it, his brow furrowing with a mixture of confusion and growing unease. Robert, Rhael said, her voice unusually subdued, as they sat down to a late supper in the castle's great hall. This news from Dragonstone, it is troubling. More than just troubling. Robert, ever practical, speared a piece of roasted boar. Aye, a bloody mystery. Where in the seven hells would 20 dragons go? A particularly large flock of gulls, perhaps. He attempted a joke, but his laughter was hollow. Rhael shook her head, her eyes wide. No, Robert, this isn't some ordinary disappearance. This is unprecedented, and the Dragonkeepers are beside themselves. Robert's jovial face grew grim. Robert slammed his fist on the table, making the plates rattle. Damnation. Just when things were settled. Stefan, Marcella, he called to his children, who were listening with wide, worried eyes. Go to your chambers, and send a letter to all our bannermen. Every fort, every town along the coast. Report any unusual sightings, anything that flies, and double the patrols along the Kingswood. He was going to prepare for a coming storm. High in the serene, unassailable fortress of the Eyrie, Lord John Arryn, Warden of the East and Lord of the Vale, sat in his solar, gazing out at the breathtaking view of the Mountains of the Moon. He had received the telegram with his customary quiet dignity, but his expression had grown troubled. He was an old man, wise and steeped in the realm's history. He had seen kings come and go, witnessed the rise and fall of houses, and remembered the bitter sting of the three sisters lost to Asgard. Dragons, gone, John murmured to himself, his voice raspy. All of them. That's a ill omen. A very ill omen. His own family, though less numerous than the Targaryens or Starks, felt the tremor of the news. His son and heir, Lord Arryn's son Elbert Arryn, was a dutiful man, and his wife, Lady Helen Royce, a woman of nervous disposition, fretted openly. Father, Elbert said, entering the solar, a copy of the telegram in his hand. This news, it has the knights uneasy. Where could 20 dragons vanish to? John sighed. The world is older than our histories, my son. And full of mysteries. This is a shift. The Targaryens, greatest power, simply, gone. It speaks of a force that fears neither fire nor steel. Increase the vigilance along the Blood Gate, John commanded, his voice firm despite his age. Ensure the mountain clans are closely monitored. And send ravens to every keep in the Vale. Any unnatural occurrences, any strange sightings, must be reported. The Vale must be ready. For anything. He knew their mountain passes were strong, but even stone could crumble. At Riverrun, the bustling seat of House Tully, the news arrived with a ripple of anxiety that spread through the castle like a cold current in the Red Fork. Lord Edmure Tully, ever well-meaning but prone to being overwhelmed by grand events, stared at the message, his face pale. Missing. Edmure stammered, reading the message aloud to his wife, Lady Rosalind Tully, a kind woman, but equally concerned by the sudden crisis. 20 dragons. That's a lot of dragons to just vanish. The Riverlands, ever the battleground of Westeros, were particularly sensitive to any sign of instability. Their prosperity was built on peace and secure trade routes, and this news threatened both. What could it mean, Edmure? Rosalind asked, her hand fluttering to her throat. Could it be a new war? A secret enemy? Edmure paced his solar, running a hand through his hair. King Maekar demands vigilance, and for us to report any sightings. But how can 20 dragons simply disappear? It defies all reason. Send ravens to all our bannermen, Edmure commanded, his voice gaining a bit more firmness. All river patrols are to be doubled. All boats traveling the Trident are to report any unusual occurrences. Any large, flying shadows. We must be ready for whatever this means. The Riverlands cannot afford to be caught unawares. He knew the Trident was a crucial artery, and its security was paramount. In the serene, shaded gardens of Sunspear, Prince Doran Martell, ruler of Dorne, received the letter. His face, usually unreadable, remained impassive, but his eyes, dark and intelligent, held a deeper, almost knowing, glint. He read the message slowly, then folded it with deliberate precision. His children, Princess Arianne Martell, bold and ambitious, and Prince Quentyn Martell, quiet and dutiful, were present. His sister, Princess Elia, was in King's Landing, privy to the immediate panic. The wild dragons are gone, Doran announced, his voice calm, almost unnervingly so. Arianne's eyes widened. Gone. All of them. That's a significant blow to the Targaryens, father. A major weakness. Quentyn, ever pragmatic, frowned. Where could they go? It defies the laws of nature for so many to simply vanish. Torrhen merely took a sip of his wine, his gaze distant. Perhaps. This is not a weakness for the Targaryens, Torrhen stated, his voice firm, so much as it is a harbinger. A sign of something greater. Something that even dragons might flee from, or be drawn to. He looked at Arianne and Quentyn. Send messages to every keep. Every watchtower along the Red Mountains. Every village by the Sea of Dorne. Report any unusual sightings, any strange movements in the sky, any unnatural cold. We will keep our own counsel on this, for now. But we will watch. We will be prepared. He had spent a lifetime playing the long game, and this, he sensed, was a game on a scale that dwarfed all others. The sun of Dorne still shone, but a chill wind was beginning to blow from the north. 0 comments 0 vote. King's Landing. 292 AC. King's Landing. Third person POV. Master Wyler, a man of advanced years with a neatly trimmed white beard and sharp, intelligent eyes, was listening to a plea from a merchant's guild. He was reviewing some mundane trade reports. Then, a sharp, insistent knock shattered the stillness in his chamber. It was not the usual gentle tap of a servant. This was quick, urgent. Wyler's head snapped up. Enter, he commanded, his voice tight with a premonition of urgency. His assistant, a young, pale man, entered the room, his eyes wide with a sense of immense importance. He clutched a sealed parchment. Master Wyler, he stammered, his voice breathless, a priority message. Just arrived. From the north. From Winterfell. From King Rickard Stark himself. Master Wyler's face, etched with the strain of the past week of fruitless searches, suddenly went rigid. His eyes, usually sharp and discerning, widened with a sudden, desperate hope that dared to bloom despite the despair of the last 7 days. He sprang from his seat, moving with surprising agility for his age, practically snatching the message from his assistant's trembling hand. He broke the 3-headed dragon seal, his fingers fumbling slightly in his haste. He unfolded the parchment, his eyes devouring the words. As he read, his initial hope gave way to a complex mixture of profound relief, swiftly followed by a chilling confusion, and then a dawning dread that etched itself onto his features. His brow furrowed deeply, a line appearing between his eyes, a tangible mark of his growing alarm. He reread the message, his lips moving silently, as if to ensure his eyes weren't deceiving him. The implications of the words, terse and direct, were immense, terrifying in their scope. A low, strangled gasp escaped his lips. The air in the chamber, usually filled with the gentle hum of activity, seemed to thicken with his palpable distress. He made his way swiftly, almost clumsily, to the solar of Prince Aelor Targaryen, the hand of the king, who had been sitting patiently nearby, reviewing a stack of recent petitions. Prince Aelor. Master Wyler gasped, his voice hoarse, a mix of triumph and terror struggling within it. A message. From Winterfell. From King Rickard himself. They've found them. Prince Aelor, his own face pale from sleepless nights and the weight of the missing dragons, moved swiftly. He rose from his seat, his eyes fixed on Wyler's distressed face. What news, Master Wyler? Have they truly found them? All of them. Hope, raw and desperate, flickered in his voice. Master Wyler thrust the parchment into Aelor's hand, his own still trembling violently. Read, Your Grace. Read. It's beyond belief. Prince Aelor snatched the message, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. His eyes scanned the familiar northern script, his breath catching in his throat. As he read, his own face underwent a similar transformation to Master Wyler's. Relief washed over him first. They are found, quickly followed by a chilling, profound unease that stole his breath. His hands began to sweat. His eyes widened, fixing on a particularly disturbing line, then another, and another. The words in the letter seemed to echo in his mind, ominous and contradictory, painting a picture that defied reason. He reread the message twice, 3 times, desperately hoping to find a mistake, but the stark facts remained. He took a deep, shaky breath, trying to process the information, but the sheer strangeness of it, coupled with the ominous location mentioned, sent a wave of fresh, paralyzing terror through him. He knew the prophecy. He knew what lay beyond the wall. And this message seemed to pull those 2 terrifying realities closer than ever before. Without a moment's hesitation, Prince Aelor turned and rushed from the chamber, clutching the crumpled letter. He moved with an urgency that disregarded all courtly decorum, his mind consumed by the chilling implications of the message. His Kingsguard, 2 stark white shadows, moved swiftly to keep pace, their faces grim at the sight of their hand's distress. Prince Aelor found King Maekar in his private solar, deep within the Red Keep, poring over old maps. The king looked up as Aelor burst in, his stern features tightening at the sight of his hand's panicked face and the obvious urgency in his movements. Your Grace. Prince Aelor choked out, his voice hoarse, his breath ragged from his frantic dash. He thrust the crumpled letter into Makar's hand, his own trembling uncontrollably. From Winterfell. From King Rickard. You must see this immediately. King Makar snatched the message, his eyes immediately assessing Aelor's raw terror. He read the words, his face grim, absorbing each piece of information with startling speed. His jaw clenched, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He finished reading, his expression hardening into a look of grim, absolute resolve. The brief flash of panic he had shown a week ago, when the dragons first vanished, was gone, replaced by a cold, dangerous fury that promised swift, decisive action. You are dismissed for the day, King Makar commanded, his voice sharp and clear, though no one else was present in the solar except his Kingsguard. He spoke to them, his tone leaving no room for question. Send word. Every Targaryen member in the Red Keep. Those of age. To the meeting room. Now. Immediately. Do not wait. The Kingsguard moved swiftly, their white cloaks a blur of motion as they dispersed to carry out the king's urgent summons. The Red Keep, which had been a hive of orderly activity just moments before, now resonated with a tense, hurried silence as the royal family was summoned, their presence required for a matter of dire importance. Within the next anxious hour, the private meeting room filled with the royal family. One by one, every adult Targaryen member in the Red Keep arrived, their faces etched with concern, their Kingsguard remaining outside the chamber doors. Prince Rhaegar and Prince Baelor arrived, their faces serious, their presence radiating a sense of grave anticipation. King Makar's brothers, Prince Aelor and Prince Aerion, were already present, Aelor still visibly shaken by the news he had delivered. Even the younger adult Targaryens, cousins and distant kin, quickly gathered, sensing the unusual gravity of the summons. King Makar stood before them, his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, like a statue carved from ice. He did not waste time with pleasantries. His eyes, though still holding a trace of fear, were now filled with a grim determination, an unshakable resolve to face the impending crisis. A message arrived this morning, King Makar announced, his voice clipped and stark, cutting through the anticipation that had thickened the air in the room. From King Rickard Stark himself. From Winterfell. He paused, taking a deep, fortifying breath, bracing himself for the impact of his next words. The silence in the room was absolute, every Targaryen leaning forward, hanging on his next words, their breath held. The wild dragons, King Makar revealed, his voice strained, a tremor running through it despite his efforts to control it, have been found. They were sighted at the coasts of Karhold. A collective sigh of relief swept through the room. Murmurs of gratitude, of, thank the seven, and, they're alive, filled the air. Faces brightened, smiles appeared, and shoulders slumped in momentary release. The immediate terror of their loss was momentarily lifted, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. But King Makar held up a hand, his gesture sharp, silencing them instantly. His grim expression had not changed. However, he continued, his voice dropping, now laced with a chilling undertone, the message states they are moving further north. The relief instantly drained from the Targaryen faces, replaced by a dawning comprehension, then stark fear. Karhold was deep in the north. Further north, meant towards the wall. Towards what lay beyond. The implication was clear, terrifying. Further north, Prince Rhaegar exclaimed, his voice sharp with dread, his scholarly mind immediately grasping the terrifying implications. But, why? What in the gods' names would draw them beyond the wall? It defies all reason. His mind instantly leapt to Aegon's prophecy, to the words King Rickard had spoken during the tourney. And there is more, Makar added, his voice like stone, cold and unyielding. King Rickard's message states there is a ship beneath them. A ship with a golden kraken sigil on its sails. The revelation added another layer of confusion and alarm, a bizarre detail that seemed utterly out of place, yet terrifyingly real. A golden kraken, Prince Baelor boomed, his brow furrowed in utter bewilderment. That is the sigil of the Greyjoys. What madness is this? Which madman sails beyond wall with dragons top of his ship? Prince Aelor's eyes narrowed, his mind racing through possibilities. So it is the Greyjoys then, or at least a renegade branch of them. They are the ones behind this. They've somehow orchestrated this, leading our dragons north. His voice was filled with a mixture of disbelief and fury. We should send a letter to Lord Greyjoy immediately and deliver it by dragon. Demand answers. See his response for it. 20 wild dragons. Prince Rhaegar countered, shaking his head, his scholarly mind still grappling with the impossible logistics. No ship, no matter how grand, could capture them. Not all at once. And why would they fly north with a ship? It makes no sense. The Greyjoys are pirates, raiders, not sorcerers who can command dragons. It must be related to the prophecy, Prince Baelor whispered, his face pale, the chilling words of Aegon's vision echoing in her ears. The darkness. The ancient enemy. The dragons are being drawn, or driven, towards it. And this ship, who would travel to such a place? What connection could they have? King Makar slammed a fist on the table, the sharp crack silencing the room instantly. His face was grim, but a steely resolve had begun to replace his earlier panic. He was a king, and a Targaryen, and he would not crumble in the face of the unknown. We need answers, King Makar stated, his voice now firm, resolute, cutting through the lingering fear. And we need to act. Now, Prince Rhaegar, Prince Baelor, ready your dragons. You will fly north, to Karhold, find them, and find out what this means. Do not engage the ship. Do not provoke them, but observe, understand, report everything. He turned to his brothers. Prince Aelor, send a return message to King Rickard. Thank him for the vital information. Ask for any further details, any additional observations of the ship or the dragons. And request continued vigilance from the north. His aid is invaluable. Prince Arion, King Makar commanded, his eyes burning with a cold fire, you personally deliver the message to Lord Greyjoy. Demand to know what madness this is. Demand to know why his sigil is found beneath our dragons heading north. And tell him this. If he does not give answers to our satisfaction, answers that are swift and truthful, then we will burn his castle to the ground. Every single one of them. We will show the Ironborn what true fire is. This is not a matter for debate, King Makar concluded, his voice unwavering, filled with renewed authority, silencing any potential objections. This is our family. This is our realm. The dragons are heading towards the darkest myths of the north. We will know why, and we will be prepared. Winter is coming, and it seems our dragons know it better than we did. The meeting, filled with renewed dread and urgent purpose, quickly turned to action. The hunt for the lost dragons had taken a chilling, unprecedented turn. The Targaryens, once so confident in their golden age, now faced a cold, terrifying unknown, propelled towards a destiny long foretold. 2 comments 0 vote. Winterfell. 292 AC. Winterfell. Third person POV. The air in King's Landing remained thick with tension even after King Makar's decisive commands. Yet, amidst the fear, a flicker of purpose had ignited within the Red Keep. By midday, Prince Rhaegar and Prince Baelor, adorned in their riding leathers, had ascended to the dragon pit. The ground trembled as their great beasts, Meryxes and Vhagar, unfolded their immense wings, their roars echoing across the city. With a powerful thrust of their legs, the dragons launched into the sky, their forms quickly diminishing to distant specks as they streaked north, leaving the worries of the capital behind. Their journey was swift, a testament to the dragon's speed. They rode the winds, covering vast distances in a fraction of the time any ship or rider on horseback could. By the afternoon of the following day, the familiar, ancient silhouette of Winterfell, stark and imposing against the northern sky, loomed into view. Smoke curled from its numerous chimneys, a welcoming sight in the crisp air. As Meryxes and Vhagar descended, their shadows momentarily engulfing the castle, the guards on the battlements raised their heads to see the beasts. The dragons landed gracefully in the courtyard, their scales shimmering, steam rising from their great nostrils in the cool northern air. Prince Brandon Stark, King Rickard's eldest son, was there to receive them. His face showed no emotions. He greeted his Targaryen princes with a nod and a firm handshake, his dark eyes conveying a shared burden. Welcome to Winterfell, Brandon said, his voice calm. Your journey was swift, I trust. You received my father's message. The news, it is grave, indeed. Rhaegar dismounted Meryxes, his expression grim. It was, Prince Brandon. The news from your father was more so. Have there been any further sightings? Not yet, Brandon replied, but we are watching. Come, you must be weary from your flight. Your chambers await. You can refresh yourselves, and we shall convene after the midday meal. The Targaryen princes were led to their guest chambers, well-appointed rooms that offered comfort and privacy. After shedding their riding leathers and refreshing themselves with cool water and fresh northern clothes, they gathered for the midday meal in the Great Hall, a silent affair punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery and the occasional rumble of a dragon outside. The air was thick with unspoken questions. After the meal, as the afternoon light slanted through the high windows of Winterfell, King Rickard Stark, accompanied by his sons, Prince Brandon, Prince Eddard, and Prince Benjen, gathered in the king's solar. Prince Rhaegar and Prince Baelor joined them, their expressions grave. The room, with its maps and ancient texts, felt like the heart of the north, prepared for council in times of crisis. King Rickard wasted no time. Princes, he began, his voice deep and steady, we received a new message from Skagos. The dragons are heading further north. By now, they should be well beyond the wall. Perhaps even far into the true north. A heavy silence fell upon the room. The implications were clear. 20 wild dragons, creatures of fire and ancient magic, were willingly venturing into the frozen wasteland that lay beyond the known world, a place whispered to be home to ancient evils. The question, Eddard said, breaking the quiet, is who would knowingly venture into such a place? Who is so mad, or so reckless, to seek out or guide dragons into the literal unknown? And with a golden kraken sigil. Indeed, Rhaegar added, his brow furrowed in thought. My father believes it must be a renegade element, perhaps even a Greyjoy faction, given the kraken. But the very idea of controlling such beasts, let alone leading them beyond the wall, defies all logic and magic known to man. Madness, Benjen muttered, shaking his head. To willingly go where no man dares, for no sane reason. They talked for some time, each man offering theories, none of them satisfactory. The air grew heavy with the weight of the impossible. It was Prince Brandon Stark who finally spoke, his voice quiet, cutting through the swirling confusion. He had been silent for much of the discussion, his eyes distant, as if observing a scene far removed from the solar. When he spoke, his words carried a chilling certainty. I know a certain madman, Brandon said, his gaze fixed on nothing, his voice low and cold, who could do such a thing. A man who has always laughed in the face of death and craved power beyond the wildest dreams of kings. All eyes turned to him, the Targaryens and his own family hanging on his words. Who? Prince Baelor demanded, his voice sharp with urgency. Brandon's eyes met Rhaegar's, then Rickard's. He calls himself the Lord Reaper of Pike, though he has long been exiled. Euron Greyjoy. He then recounted the chilling tales of Euron Greyjoy, his exile, his travels to distant, forbidden lands, his rumored sorceries, his acquisition of dark knowledge and strange artifacts. He spoke of Euron's ambition, his absolute ruthlessness, and his unsettling fascination with ancient powers. Euron Greyjoy has always been a man apart, Brandon explained, his voice unwavering. He has sailed where no maps exist, seen things men were not meant to see. There are whispers of blood magic, of dark rituals, of voices from the deepest trenches of the world. A man who returned from exile not as a broken reaver, but as someone touched by something else. If anyone has the audacity, the utter lack of sanity, or the dark knowledge to influence dragons and lead them into the deep north, it is Euron Crow's eye. A cold dread settled over the Targaryens. The name, Euron Greyjoy, was vaguely known, a renegade, but these new details painted a far more terrifying picture. Brandon paused, then continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, his words echoing the ancient prophecy that had bound their houses for generations. If the Night King truly has 20 undead dragons under his control, guided by this madman Euron Greyjoy, then the realm of men should be ready for a darkness even larger than the previous long night. This is not a raid, it is a full-scale invasion. The others are returning. King Rickard Stark, his face grim but determined, looked at Prince Rhaegar. The ancient pact, the shared knowledge, the chilling prophecy, it all converged in this moment. Prince Rhaegar, Rickard said, his voice devoid of doubt, send a message to your father. Tell him the time for speculation is over. The ancient enemy is back. Tell him to mobilize every single soldier in the realm. Every able-bodied man and woman. Tell him to bring every able dragon rider you have to the wall. Every single one. The wall, Rickard continued, his gaze unwavering, is the only thing stopping him. And it is stronger than ever before. But it will need the realm united, with fire and steel. I will send a message to Moat Cailin immediately, instructing them to allow the army to enter the north without delay. No tolls, no questions. They are to prepare to provision and shelter an entire army as it marches north. Prince Rhaegar's face was pale, but his eyes held a steely resolve. The terror of the prophecy was now a tangible threat, and the path forward was clear. He nodded, accepting the immense weight of the command. It shall be done, King Rickard, Prince Rhaegar replied, his voice firm despite the gravity of the situation. He rose and exited the solar, his steps urgent, ready to dispatch the most critical message of his lifetime. The dragons of the Targaryens had found their purpose once more, called to face the ultimate darkness alongside the men of the north. The heavy oak door of King Rickard's solar swung shut with a soft, resonant thud, severing the room from the outside world. The hurried footsteps of Prince Rhaegar and Prince Baelor, rushing to prepare their dragons, faded quickly into the distant sounds of the castle. Inside, the chamber, still permeated with the scent of old parchment and crackling pine from the hearth, became utterly silent, save for the soft hiss of the fire. Rickard's eyes, dark as the deepest winter lake, settled first on Brandon. He saw the cold understanding, the preternatural calm that often accompanied his son's brilliance. Brandon had always possessed an uncanny connection to the ancient whispers of their house, a wisdom that surpassed his years. Then, his gaze moved to Eddard. He saw the grim resolve, the steadfast loyalty that defined his second son. Eddard was the rock, the unwavering embodiment of Stark duty. He would do what was asked, no matter the cost, no matter the terror. Finally, Rickard's eyes lingered on Benjen. The boy, who just moments ago had spoken of joining the Night's Watch for a quiet vigil, now faced a reality that would test the very limits of his courage. Rickard saw no fear in Benjen's eyes, only a dawning understanding, a readiness that both saddened and fiercely proud him. Benjen's choice, made in quiet contemplation, was suddenly endowed with a terrifying, vital significance. Rickard took a deep, fortifying breath, the sound barely audible in the silence. His voice, when it came, was low, a steady rumble that vibrated with ancient power and unyielding command. It was the voice of a king, speaking to his blood, to the very heart of his house. "My sons," King Rickard began, his voice gravelly, imbued with the weight of generations of Stark knowledge. "We have our own duties. Our own preparations to make. The time for whispers and prophecies is over. The long night is upon us." He looked at each of them, his gaze piercing. "The wall is strong, stronger than it has ever been. Brandon's telegram network, the reinforced gates, the sheer scale of the stone, it is a testament to our vigilance, to our ancestors' wisdom." He paused, his voice hardening. "But it is only stone. Against what comes, we will need more than stone." His instructions were clear, precise, leaving no room for hesitation or doubt. The time for debate was over. Now was the time for action. "Send messages," Rickard commanded, his voice gaining in intensity, "to every single one of our bannermen. To every lord, every sworn sword, every able-bodied man and woman in the north. From the neck to the furthest shores of the shivering sea. Tell them to mobilize every soldier. Every man and woman capable of bearing arms. They are to make ready, and march for the wall." The implications of this command were staggering. The North, a land vast and sparsely populated, was about to empty itself, its entire military might converging on a single, ancient, frozen barrier. It was an order of unprecedented scale, a call to arms unlike any since the first men marched against the long night of old. The quiet fields would become barren, the villages hushed as their populations answered the call. Families would be separated, lives put on hold, all for a threat that most Southerners still believed to be a myth. But the Starks knew. They had always known. "This is not a suggestion," Rickard continued, his voice leaving no doubt of the urgency. "This is a direct command from the King of Asgard. No delays. No excuses. The railways will be put to full military use. The steam carriages will be used for rapid transport within our own roads. They are to use every available means to move their forces with unprecedented speed." The speed Brandon's inventions offered was no longer a matter of luxury or commerce, it was a matter of survival. Then, Rickard's gaze hardened further, his voice dropping to a chillingly serious tone. "And send word to our own dragon riders. Every single one of them. They are to ride immediately to the wall. To the Shadow Tower, to Castle Black, to Eastwatch by the Sea. They are to establish a constant aerial vigil along its entire length. No breaks. No rest." He was speaking of their own unique dragons, the formidable ice dragons of the far north. Beasts of immense power, their scales shimmering with the cold, their breath a chilling frost. They were the true guardians of Asgard, ancient beings bound to the Starks by blood and magic. To summon them all, to bring them to the forefront of a looming war, was a measure of absolute desperation. "Should the Targaryens' wild dragons," Rickard continued, his voice grim, "make an attack on the wall, they are to be intercepted. With extreme prejudice. We will do everything in our power to divert them, to turn them back. But if they cannot be turned, if they attempt to breach the wall, they must be stopped. Even if it means confronting them." A grim silence followed this command. The irony was not lost on any of them. The dragons of their allies, powerful beasts of fire, might now be instruments of their destruction. The thought of their ice dragons engaging the Targaryens' fire dragons, especially under such dire circumstances, was a bitter one. But the wall must not fall. That was the paramount truth. "The wall," Rickard stated, his voice resonating with a power that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the solar, "is our last line. It is humanity's shield. It is the ancient magic that holds back the darkness. It should not fall at any costs. Not a single inch. Not a single stone. Our lives, the lives of everyone south of it, depend on it. This is our duty. This is our purpose. This is what we were born for." He looked at his sons, his gaze unwavering, challenging them, instilling in them the full, terrifying weight of their lineage. Brandon's eyes, dark and knowing, met his father's. He understood. The technological wonders he had brought, the railways and the telegrams, would now serve a single, terrifying purpose, to prepare for a war unlike any the living had ever known. His inventions, designed for peace and progress, were now tools of survival. He merely nodded, a silent, grim acceptance. Eddard's face was pale, but his jaw was set with a quiet resolve. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for the task ahead. He would carry out his father's commands with unwavering loyalty and efficiency. Duty. It was the core of his being. Benjen's initial shock had transformed into a fierce determination. His eyes gleamed with a newfound purpose. His choice to join the Night's Watch, once a personal calling, now felt like a premonition, a destiny fulfilled. He would be at the Wall, where he belonged, where he was needed most. Father. Their voice rang out, clear and sharp. Without another word, the three sons rose from the table. The quiet domesticity of their morning conversation was shattered. The future of the realm, the very survival of mankind, now rested on their shoulders. They moved with a silent, urgent purpose, each man heading to his designated task, the commands already burning in their minds. The heavy oak door of the solar swung shut once more, leaving King Rickard Stark alone in the room. He walked slowly to the ancient hearth, staring into the dancing flames, his hands clasped behind his back. The warmth of the fire offered little comfort against the chilling truth that now settled in his soul. He was the king of Asgard, the lord of Winterfell, the guardian of the north. He had lived his life in an era of unprecedented peace and prosperity, a golden age built on the foundations of his ancestors and the ingenuity of his son. But the whispers had always been there. The tales told by the oldest crones in the farthest villages. The grim warnings passed down from Stark King to Stark King. The ancient knowledge, dismissed by the complacent South, had always been real. Rickard closed his eyes, picturing the vast, silent, terrifying expanse beyond the wall. The land where light died, where life froze, where the ancient enemy stirred. The others. The Night King. And now, perhaps, even the wild dragons, drawn by some dark, irresistible call, becoming instruments of destruction. He had sent his sons, his flesh and blood, to face this darkness. He had mobilized his entire kingdom. He had called upon the ancient, hidden power of his own ice dragons. It was all he could do. The solar, usually a place of quiet contemplation, now felt vast and empty around him, filled only with the echoes of his commands and the chilling silence of the coming storm. The fire in the hearth crackled, a small, defiant warmth against the cold that was coming. Winter was coming, and this time, it would bring an enemy unlike any seen in 1,000 generations. King Rickard Stark, alone in his solar, waited. 1 comments 0 vote. Beyond the Wall. 292 AC. Beyond the Wall. Third person POV. The bitter winds of the far north whipped against the desolate, crumbling structures of Hardhome. It was a place synonymous with death, a haunted ruin of shattered huts and crumbling watchtowers, long abandoned by all living men. Yet, a solitary ship had defied the icy currents and jagged shores, docking its dark, ominous hull against the splintered remains of a pier. Its sails, made of an unsettlingly dark canvas, bore a chilling emblem, a golden kraken. It was a sigil known to any reputable house in Westeros. At the ship's prow stood Euron Greyjoy, the Crow's Eye. He was a figure of unsettling charisma and palpable madness, his single visible eye, a cold, calculating, scanning the bleak landscape before him. The other eye remained hidden beneath a leather patch, a testament to rumored horrors seen in distant, forbidden lands. He stood perfectly still, his long, dark coat whipping around him in the relentless wind. In his hand, clutched tight, was an object of terrifying power, a dragonhorn. Its obsidian surface seemed to drink the light, and faint, unsettling runes glowed softly along its length, pulsating with a dark, binding energy. Above him, circling in the frigid, gray sky, were the 20 wild dragons from Dragonstone. They were magnificent, terrifying creatures of fire and scale, but they were not soaring freely, not hunting with their usual predatory grace. They moved clumsily, struggling against an invisible, agonizing force. Their massive wings beat heavily, their roars were not of defiance or dominance, but of distress, low guttural growls of pain and reluctance. Their eyes, normally bright with draconic intelligence, were dulled, haunted by an unseen torment. They spiraled, dipped, and veered, clearly wanting to break free, to fly away from the oppressive cold and the unseen tormentor. Yet, they were bound. Invisibly, inextricably, to the horn in Euron's hand. The air around them thrummed with the raw power of the dragonhorn, a constant, agonizing thrum that vibrated through their very bones. They fought it, great beasts of fire and fury, but the horn's dark magic was stronger. It was a physical constraint, a magical chain that tethered their wills to Euron's command. Smoke, black and acrid, occasionally billowed from their nostrils, not from aggression, but from exertion, from their constant, futile struggle against the unseen bonds. Their struggles were visible, heartbreaking, for such proud creatures. Euron merely watched them, a thin, cruel smile playing on his lips, a look of profound, unsettling satisfaction in his single visible eye. Below the tortured dragons, the few remaining Ironborn crew who were raised from dead on Euron's ship moved like hushed shadows, their faces pale, their blue eyes without emotion. The cold was absolute. Euron, however, seemed impervious to it, his skin seemingly drinking in the frigid air, as if it fueled his dark ambition. He spent 2 days at Hardhome, merely resting, observing his bound treasures. The dragons circled constantly, their torment a low, mournful drone in the otherwise silent desolation. On the 3rd day, Euron Greyjoy gave a command to his undead soldier. The ship, with the captive dragons reluctantly hovering above it, began its arduous journey further north. They were entering the land of always winter, a place of myth and terror, a realm utterly devoid of living warmth. The landscape transformed rapidly. The meager, snow-dusted trees of the haunted forest gave way to vast, open plains of unbroken ice and snow. Jagged, black mountains, sharp as dragon teeth, pierced the pale, sunless sky. The cold deepened, became an all-encompassing presence, a physical entity that bit at exposed skin and turned breath to instant frost. The wind howled, a relentless, mournful lament across the desolate wastes. The dragons struggled more intensely now. Their fiery breath was instantly consumed by the frigid air, their massive bodies shivered uncontrollably despite their natural heat. They were creatures of fire, forced into a domain of absolute ice, their very essence rebelling against the environment. Yet, they continued to move. The dragonhorn in Euron's hand pulsed with a darker, more insistent glow. He would raise it, point it, and the dragons, with tortured shrieks and desperate beatings of their wings, would comply, their struggles a testament to the horn's agonizing power over them. The ship below them, too, fought the journey. Its hull scraped against unseen ice floes, its engines strained against the thick, frozen waters. It was a painstaking, slow progress, each mile an arduous battle against the unforgiving elements. Euron remained on deck, a solitary, defiant figure against the overwhelming desolation. He seemed to draw strength from the cold, his madness only deepening as they plunged further into the frozen heart of the world. He rarely slept, his visible eye always scanning the horizon, an unsettling excitement burning within it. The silence of the land of always winter was absolute, broken only by the mournful roars of the dragons and the creaking of the ship's timbers. For 2 days, they traveled through this frozen hell. 2 days of relentless cold, of the dragon's agonizing compliance, of Euron's unwavering, insane purpose. They were journeying to a destination known only to him, and to the ancient evil he sought. Finally, after an eternity of frozen landscape, the ship ground to a halt. The air was utterly still, the wind having died completely, replaced by a silence so profound it seemed to press in on the very soul. A chilling, unnatural cold emanated from the horizon, a cold that seeped into the bones and stole the breath. Before them, stretching as far as the eye could see, was a vast, desolate plain of black ice. And on it, waiting, stood an assembly of chilling figures. Tall, gaunt, their bodies covered in ancient, crystalline armor, their eyes glowing with an eerie, cerulean light. The White Walkers. And at their center, an even more terrifying figure. Imposing, silent, cloaked in ice and shadow. The Night King. His crown of jagged ice, his skeletal face, and his piercing blue eyes held an ancient, malevolent power that dwarfed all other horrors. He was stillness personified, death given form. Euron Greyjoy stepped off his ship, his boots crunching on the ice. He walked towards the Night King, his stride confident, almost gleeful. The 20 wild dragons, still bound by the horn, hovered uneasily above the scene, their distress palpable, their roars echoing weakly in the desolate silence. He stopped a respectful distance from the Night King. Then, with a dramatic flourish, Euron reached up and removed his leather eye patch. His empty socket was gone. In its place, a single, glowing blue eye stared out, an exact replica of the Night King's own, shining with an unholy, chilling light. It was a sign of his transformation, his allegiance. With a final, theatrical flourish, Euron sank to one knee, bending his head in submission. My king, Euron's voice resonated, oddly calm, utterly devoid of fear, filled only with manic subservience. I have brought the servants for you. He gestured upwards, to the struggling dragons, his ultimate gift. The Night King remained utterly motionless, a silent, terrifying presence. His chilling blue gaze swept over the dragons, assessing them. He could see their varying sizes, their raw power, their tormented struggle against the horn. His gaze lingered on the largest of them all, a colossal beast with black scales and ancient scars, a dragon known only as Cannibal, the fiercest and most untamable of the wild dragons of Dragonstone. It was larger than any of the Targaryens' ridden dragons, a true force of nature. The next largest dragons were roughly the size of Vermithor, great, powerful beasts, their bodies heavy even in their aerial torment. From there, the dragon's sizes diminished, until the smallest were no larger than a horse, mere hatchlings grown to adolescent proportions. The Night King's eyes, devoid of any emotion save for cold, ancient purpose, finally settled. With a slow, deliberate movement, he raised his hand. From the very air, from the pure essence of ice, a spear materialized in his grasp. It was a shard of impossible ice, sharp as dragon glass, shimmering with an unearthly blue light. The Night King raised the spear, his arm moving with an unnerving, effortless grace. He then hurled it, not at Euron, not at the White Walkers, but at Cannibal. The ice spear flew true, a silent, deadly projectile. It pierced Cannibal's massive, scaly neck with a sickening thud, puncturing scales and flesh. The great dragon let out a single, agonizing shriek, a sound of pure agony and confusion. Its immense body spasmed, then went rigid. Cannibal, the largest, fiercest wild dragon, plunged from the sky, hitting the black ice with a deafening crash that reverberated across the plain, sending cracked spider webbing outwards. It lay still, its breath stolen, its fiery life extinguished. Cannibal was dead. The other White Walkers, their own blue eyes glowing, began to move. In a horrifying, coordinated act, they too summoned ice spears from the air. With chilling precision, they hurled them at the remaining 19 dragons. The dragons, still bound by the pervasive magic of Euron's horn, could not escape. They writhed, shrieked, and struggled with desperate, futile effort, their attempts to dodge or flee thwarted by the unseen chains that held their wills captive. Spear after spear flew, piercing flesh, puncturing vital organs. One by one, with tormented roars and silent plunges, all the dragons died. Their massive bodies lay sprawled across the ice, lifeless, their scales dulled, their fire gone. The great creatures of flame, once symbols of life and power, were now mere corpses in a landscape of death. The Night King, his face utterly devoid of expression, then raised his arms slowly. A chilling, unnatural cold swept across the plains, a wave of dark magic that radiated from him, chilling the very air, stealing the warmth from the living and drawing power from the dead. The eyes of the fallen dragons, previously dull and lifeless, snapped open. But they were no longer the eyes of living creatures. They glowed with an eerie, vibrant blue light, the same chilling hue as the Night King's own eyes. Their broken bodies shuddered. Muscles, once rigid, began to twitch. With a collective, groaning sound, the dragons rose. They were no longer living beasts. They were horrors of ice and death. Their scales were coated in rime, their wings torn in places, their movements stiff, unnatural. They were undead dragons, part of the dead army, terrifying, unholy creatures of the Night King. Their roars, when they came, were not sounds of fire and fury, but chilling, guttural howls, devoid of life, filled only with the cold malice of their new master. The Night King lowered his arms, his silent gaze once more falling upon Euron Greyjoy. With a slow, deliberate movement, the Night King extended a hand, his icy fingers reaching for Euron's face. He placed his hand on Euron Greyjoy's brow. A surge of unimaginable cold, a blast of raw, necromantic power, coursed through Euron's body. It was a dark gift, a chilling empowerment. Euron's single blue eye flared even brighter. A horrifying, ecstatic grin split his face. The cold, the pain, the sheer, overwhelming power, seemed to ignite the deepest depths of his madness. He threw back his head and began to laugh manically. It was a high-pitched, guttural cackle, echoing across the frozen plains, a sound of pure, unbridled insanity and triumph. He had achieved his ultimate desire, true power. My king, Euron shrieked, his voice filled with a horrifying glee, his blue eye blazing. They are yours. And now, I will look every part of this land. Every field, every forest, every forgotten grave. And I will revive all the dead. Euron cackled, his voice rising to a fever pitch. Every fallen warrior, every long-dead fishman, every frozen corpse. They will serve, they will join your army. The living will tremble, the realm will fall. The Night King merely looked at Euron, his own expression unchanging, his gaze cold and ancient. He gave a single, slow, nod. It was a silent, terrifying affirmation, a release for Euron to unleash his dark, new power. Euron bowed deeply, his manic laughter still echoing. He then turned, moving towards a dead horse, its eyes now glowing blue, waiting patiently nearby. He mounted the skeletal steed, his figure dark against the pale, endless ice. With a final, triumphant cackle, Euron spurred the dead horse, riding off into the desolate, frozen landscape. His mission: to search every part of the land of always winter for living things that could be turned, for dead things that could be raised. His laughter continued to echo, a chilling harbinger of the doom he now carried across the unforgiving lands, ushering in a long night darker than any before. 2 comments 0 vote. Castle Black. 292 AC. Castle Black. Third-person POV. The relentless wind, a constant companion in the far north, tore across the frozen plains, whipping against the towering, impossible expanse of the wall. Its ancient ice, 1,000 feet high and miles long, seemed to hum with a fading magic, a mournful whisper against the encroaching darkness. Below its colossal shadow, the desolate, icy waste stretched into an unforgiving horizon. But within the protective embrace of this ancient barrier, and across the vast, snow-covered lands to its south, a different kind of sound now filled the air. Not the quiet vigil of the Night's Watch, but the immense, throbbing heartbeat of a continent united. Castle Black, the grim bastion of the Sworn Brothers, was no longer a solitary outpost. It had become the nexus of Westeros's defiance. The grounds surrounding Castle Black, once barren and windswept, were now a sprawling, temporary city of military might. Tents, thousands upon thousands, stretched to the horizon, their varied colors a patchwork quilt against the stark white of the snow. The banners of every great house in Westeros, from the fiery dragon of the Targaryens to the stark direwolf of the north, fluttered in the relentless wind, a solemn, unifying display of force. The air itself vibrated with the collective energy of 400,000 soldiers, an army unprecedented in the history of the realm. This was not merely a muster, this was the entirety of Westeros's fighting strength, brought to bear against an enemy that defied all known warfare. The very ground seemed to tremble under the sheer weight of so many men, so many horses, so much steel. The scent of wood smoke, thick and pungent, mingled with the earthy smell of damp leather, the metallic tang of polished armor, and the nervous sweat of 250,000 men. The clang of hammers, the shouts of officers, the distant rumble of supply wagons, the disciplined tramp of marching boots, these were the sounds of humanity's final preparation. On top of the wall, a thin, determined line of 30,000 man soldiers stood vigilant. Their figures, dwarfed by the immense scale of the ice, were nevertheless resolute. They were the first line of defense, the watchful eyes peering into the gathering storm beyond. Their breaths plumed into frosty clouds, their weapons glinted in the perpetual twilight of the northern sky, their faces etched with a grim, unwavering resolve. Above them, soaring through the desolate sky, were the terrifying, magnificent beasts of fire and ice. 10 great fire dragons of House Targaryen, their scales shimmering with shades of crimson, gold, and bronze, their massive wings beating with powerful, rhythmic strokes, circled above the frozen landscape. Their roars, deep and resonant, echoed across the icy plains, a sound of ancient power, a warning to the encroaching darkness. They were awe-inspiring, fearsome, and utterly vital. And alongside them, sometimes circling in graceful, chilling silence, were the 15 ice dragons of Asgard. Their scales, translucent and crystalline, caught the sparse light, making them seem like living glaciers in the air. Their eyes glowed with an ethereal, icy blue light, and their breath, a chilling mist, trailed behind them. These ancient creatures, bound to the Starks by blood and magic, moved with an almost preternatural quiet, their presence a stark, beautiful contrast to the fiery might of the Targaryens. A constant aerial vigil was maintained, with 6 dragons, 3 fire, 3 ice, always patrolling the wall's immense length. Their watchful eyes, both keen and magical, pierced the perpetual twilight beyond, searching for any sign of the advancing horror, any hint of movement in the vast, white void. A truly unnerving development had been confirmed in the past few days. The fire dragons, the Targaryen beasts, could now, with startling ease, move beyond the wall. This had been a feat considered impossible for millennia, as the wall's ancient enchantments had always repelled them, preventing passage to the magical beings of the south. This chilling shift suggested that the very magic of the wall, its protective enchantment, was indeed fading, perhaps eroded by the relentless, encroaching power of the others. It was a terrifying confirmation that the enemy was not merely physical but magical, its power already beginning to seep into the very foundations of the world, weakening humanity's ultimate defense. Then, the final, grim news had arrived. Delivered by the swift messengers of the Night's Watch, corroborated by the ethereal whispers of the wargs who constantly pierced the veil of the unknown, sacrificing their minds to observe the enemy. The dead were close. 2 days. 2 days away from the wall. The final countdown, the terrifying, inevitable beginning of the long night, had begun. Within the frigid, stone-hewn war room of Castle Black, a space usually reserved for the grim, solitary deliberations of the Night's Watch leadership, the most powerful men in Westeros were now gathered. The room was sparse, utilitarian, designed for purpose rather than comfort, its rough-hewn stone walls lined with hastily drawn maps of the north, crude sketches of defensive positions, and ancient carvings depicting horrors long forgotten. A large, worn wooden table, scarred by centuries of use and etched with the marks of countless previous commanders, dominated the center of the room. The air was heavy, thick with the unsaid, with the sense of destiny and dread that hung over every soul present. Every face in the room, from the hardened warriors to the calculating lords, bore the indelible mark of the dire circumstances. This was not a meeting of politics or pleasantries, it was a council of war, a desperate last stand. At the head of the table, a stark juxtaposition of fire and ice, sat King Maekar Targaryen and King Rickard Stark. Maekar, regal and unbowed, his silver hair a beacon in the dim light, exuded an aura of calm authority, though the lines around his eyes spoke of sleepless nights. Beside him, Rickard, grim and unyielding, his dark eyes holding a deep, ancient wisdom, sat like a pillar of northern stone, embodying the very spirit of his unforgiving land. The two kings, representing the South's might and the North's resilience, were united against a common, existential foe. Around the table sat their royal families, the living symbols of their power. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, the crown prince, ever the scholar and warrior, his eyes sharp and analytical, already dissecting the grim possibilities. His face, usually serene, was taut with a grim determination. Prince Baelor Targaryen, hot-headed and direct, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword, his eagerness for direct combat barely contained. Prince Aelor Targaryen, hand of the king, his face etched with the strain of countless decisions and the profound worry of his monarch. Prince Aerion Targaryen, Lord of the Stepstones, his usual arrogance replaced by a grim, if still self-assured, understanding of the severity of the threat. Prince Brandon Stark, his eyes holding a profound, unsettling knowledge, his silence often more impactful than any speech. He surveyed the room with an almost preternatural calm. Prince Eddard Stark, steadfast and honorable, his jaw set in firm resolve, embodying the unflinching duty of his house. Prince Benjen Stark, the youngest, now a sworn brother of the Night's Watch, his youthful eagerness tempered by the gravity of his new reality, his gaze fixed intently on the older commanders. Across from them sat the Lord Paramounts, the pillars of the South, their presence a testament to the unprecedented unity of the realm, their faces reflecting the unique burdens of their lands. Lord Tywin Lannister, his face impassive, his green eyes assessing everything with cold, precise calculation, already weighing men against objectives. Lord Mace Tyrell, his usual boisterousness subdued, a nervous energy about him, clearly out of his element in the harsh northern climes. Lord Robert Baratheon, grim-faced, his usual joviality replaced by a simmering intensity, his thick brow furrowed, eager for a fight. Lord Jon Arryn, old and wise, his gaze steady, burdened by the historical echoes of this moment, a pillar of calm amidst the rising storm. Lord Edmure Tully, earnest and worried, looking out of his depth yet determined to contribute to the realm's defense. Prince Oberyn Martell, his face unreadable, his quiet intelligence observing every nuance of the room, his long-term strategies now put to the ultimate test. And surrounding them, representing the grim heart of the North, were its major northern lords, their hardened faces reflecting centuries of vigilance against the very threat now upon them. Lord Rickon Scull, from the moat, his face weathered like ancient stone, his eyes sharp with the knowledge of winter's true terror. Lord Rykar Lothbrok, a fierce warrior, his beard grizzled, his hand resting on the pommel of his greatsword. Lord Torrhen Stark, his features as stark as his name, resolute and unyielding. Lord Jon Umber, a giant of a man, his gruff demeanor belying a deep-seated loyalty. Lord Roose Bolton, a chillingly calm figure, his eyes holding a disturbing glint, even in the face of universal dread. Lord Roderick Ricewell, a cunning and adaptable lord from the western north, his gaze intelligent and keen. Also present were the grim-faced military leaders. The Kingsguard commander, Esser Barristan Selmy, a paragon of knightly virtue, standing silent and watchful beside King Maekar, and William Dustin, the Wolf Pack commander, a grim, battle-hardened veteran of the northern armies, chosen for his strategic prowess and unflinching loyalty, standing near King Rickard. King Rickard Stark cleared his throat, his voice, though not loud, cut through the heavy silence, instantly commanding attention. My lords, princes, we have gathered. The wargs have reported. The dead are 2 days away. 2 days, and the long night begins anew. We have rallied. We have gathered the greatest army Westeros has ever seen. Now, we must plan. We must decide how best to wield this strength. Rickard Stark continued, his gaze sweeping over the assembled lords. The wall is our shield. But a shield needs a hand to wield it, and a sword to strike. We need to assign commanders to the key forts along the wall. Castle Black, Shadow Tower, Eastwatch by the Sea. These are the crucial points. Who will hold them? And who will command the men atop the wall itself, the vanguard against the storm? Lord Tywin Lannister, ever pragmatic, spoke first, his voice cold and precise, cutting through the heavy air. My legions are disciplined, your grace. They excel at defense. I propose my forces, under my direct command, man Castle Black. It is the strongest point, and requires absolute control. Mace Tyrell, though a bit flushed, pushed his chest out. Highgarden's knights are renowned, your grace. We could hold Eastwatch. A strong naval presence there could deter any flanking movements from the sea, should the others somehow try to bypass the wall via the ice. Lord Umber, his gruff voice rumbling, spoke up. The Shadow Tower, your grace, should be held by men who know the mountains, who know the passes. My sons, and the mountain clans, would be best suited to guard its ancient ways. Robert Baratheon slammed a fist on the table, a booming sound in the confined space. Put me on the wall, your grace. Give me a hammer and 30,000 men. I'll bash every one of those frozen bastards back to hell myself. John Arryn, ever thoughtful, raised a hand. While the enthusiasm is appreciated, Lord Robert, the wall requires precise, coordinated command. I propose a unified command structure on the wall itself. Perhaps Lord Ricewell, with his keen understanding of northern logistics and his own cavalry, could oversee patrols along the top. Lord Karstark spoke, his voice firm. My house has bled for the north for centuries. Our men are strong, hardened. We will hold whichever fort is deemed most critical, your graces. Edmure Tully wrung his hands, his concern palpable. My men are good fighters, your grace, but the riverlands are open. We are not accustomed to ice and snow. We would serve best in support, perhaps ensuring supply lines are defending a strategic point behind the wall, keeping the flow of men and material constant. Prince Oberyn Martell, his face impassive, spoke softly, his voice a quiet counterpoint to the more impassioned northern lords. Dornish spears are swift, your graces. We are not accustomed to static defense. We would be best suited for mobile engagement, for striking where least expected, should the line falter, to cut off their flanks or rear. Lord Bolton, his gaze unnervingly calm, offered, my men are disciplined. They will obey any command, anywhere. If a breach requires a desperate, suicidal stand, my house is ready to provide it. King Maekar listened to each lord, his expression unchanged, absorbing their strengths and weaknesses. Rickard merely observed, his dark eyes missing nothing, evaluating every proposition. And then, King Maekar continued, his voice grave, cutting through the various proposals, the truly terrifying question. What do we do if the wall is breached? What if they somehow break through? This enemy, it does not eat. It does not rest. It is relentless. It feels no pain. It feels no fear. It simply advances. How do we fight an endless, tireless horde that cannot truly die? How do we stop the tide if it washes over us? A palpable shiver went through the room. The question hung in the air, a terrifying reality that none had truly faced before. Human armies could retreat, could regroup, could starve an enemy out. Not this one. It was a foe of a fundamentally different nature. It was then that Prince Brandon Stark, who had been silent for a long while, his gaze fixed on the crude map of the north spread across the large wooden table, finally spoke. His voice was low, calm, almost detached, yet it commanded immediate, absolute attention from every man in the room. His stillness seemed to draw all eyes to him, sensing a truth about to be unveiled. Your Grace, Brandon began, his eyes lifting to meet Maekar's, then Rickard's, and finally sweeping across the faces of the assembled lords. My lords, we cannot fight this enemy like a traditional war. A prolonged war, a war of attrition, we will lose. Their numbers are endless. Our numbers are finite. Our resources are finite. Theirs are the very dead beneath our feet, rising with every casualty we suffer. He paused, letting the grim truth sink into the very marrow of their bones. The enormity of the statement resonated in the silence. Then, his voice gained a chilling, precise clarity, each word weighed, each phrase imbued with a terrible logic. Our main target must be the Night King, Brandon declared, his words ringing with conviction. Once he is dealt with, the war will be over. The dead will fall, inert once more. Their source of power, their animating force, will be severed. He tapped a finger on the map, far beyond the wall, in the uncharted territories of the land of always winter. Our wargs, Brandon continued, explaining the vital role of his unique northern assets, they have been constantly scanning the lands beyond the wall. They pierce the veil, enduring the cold, sacrificing their minds to pinpoint his exact location. They will continue to do so, throughout the battle. They are our eyes in the darkness, our crucial intelligence. Once we know where he is, Brandon outlined, his voice growing firmer, laying out a terrifying, yet possibly only, strategy, we should make our way towards him. With our best cavalry, our swiftest, most disciplined riders, supplemented by our own dragons. It must be a surgical strike, a desperate gamble, a piercing thrust at the heart of their darkness. We should take him as soon as possible. It cannot be delayed. This is our only path to victory. We cannot have a prolonged war with this enemy, Brandon reiterated, his voice firm, echoing the grim reality of their situation. Every day that passes, more of our living will die, and more of their dead will rise to swell their ranks. We must end it swiftly, at its source, before the tide becomes truly insurmountable. Then, his gaze flickered, a new layer of profound concern entering his usually cold eyes. And then there is Euron Greyjoy. If he truly has the Dragonhorn, that dark relic he is rumored to possess, the very horn that binds and commands the wild dragons, then the Valyrian dragons, the fire dragons of House Targaryen, are vulnerable. A collective gasp went through the room. The horn's legendary power over dragons, even those bonded to riders, was a terrifying thought. If Euron could command the wild dragons, he could command the others too, turning Westeros's greatest weapon against itself. The thought was chilling. The fire dragons, Brandon explained, his voice grim, can only truly join the battle once that horn is taken care of. They are too vulnerable to be controlled, to be turned against us. We cannot risk such a catastrophic betrayal. The ice dragons, our dragons, are immune to the horn's magic, being creatures of a different essence. They will be our initial aerial defense. They will buy time. He then looked at King Maekar, then to the Kingsguard commander. We have barrels of wildfire. Lots of them, stockpiled over the years. We should prepare them for launch. They can be hurled from the wall, from the catapults, or even carried by our ice dragons, dropping them with precision. We can launch them towards the dead, Brandon proposed, his eyes burning with a grim strategic fire, and ignite them. This will destroy numbers of the dead, creating a fiery barrier. It will make sure the dead do not come near the wall. We can use their mindless hunger for life, their attraction to heat, against them, forcing them into a killing zone. A tense, absolute silence followed Brandon's words. His plan was audacious, desperate, and terrifyingly logical. It hinged on swift, decisive action, on using their enemy's nature against them, and on a perilous, almost suicidal, strike at the very heart of the darkness. It was a plan born of necessity, of the understanding that conventional warfare against the dead was futile. Lord Tywin Lannister's eyes narrowed, weighing the audacity of the plan against its cold, strategic brilliance. A high risk, he mused, his voice devoid of emotion, but if the Night King is truly the key, then it is the only path that offers any hope of decisive victory. Mace Tyrell looked pale, but even he nodded slowly, a shiver running through him at the sheer scale of the gamble. Robert Baratheon, however, grinned, a flash of his old, battle-hungry self returning. A bloody charge at the bastard himself. Aye, that's a plan I can get behind, my king. Let me lead the vanguard. Jon Arryn stroked his beard, his brow furrowed in deep thought. The warg's continuous tracking will be paramount, Prince Brandon. And the cavalry must be chosen with utmost care. This is not a charge for glory, but for the very survival of all. Prince Aberon Martell, his face still unreadable, gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of agreement. A desperate gamble, but as Prince Brandon said, a prolonged war against this enemy is suicide. Precision is our only weapon against overwhelming numbers. Lord Skull, his face grim, simply grunted in agreement. We will find him, Prince. Our wargs are ready. Lord Lothbrok clenched his fist. And our riders will ride. No matter the cost. Lord Bolton, his lips barely curving into a faint, chilling smile, nodded. A quick, decisive cut. Efficient. King Maekar Targaryen looked at King Rickard, a silent understanding passing between them. The prophecy, the enemy, the final, terrifying conflict that their ancestors had foretold. Brandon's plan, born of northern understanding and Asgardian insight, resonated with the ancient truths of their joined houses. Then it is settled, King Maekar said, his voice firm, filled with renewed purpose, the weight of his crown settling heavily upon his brow. The strategy is clear. We will strike at the head. We will fight them at the wall. And we will send our champions to face their king. Rickard nodded, his gaze unwavering, a silent promise of support. We will ensure our wargs are relentless, Your Grace. The moment the Night King reveals himself, the signal will go out. We will not fail. The discussion continued, though less about the overall strategy and more about the grim details of its execution, which specific cavalry units would be chosen for the Night King strike, the precise communication protocols for the wargs, the exact placement of the wildfire stockpiles, and the specific commands for each fort. Lord Skull would command the Shadow Tower, Lord Karstark Eastwatch, while Tywin Lannister would take command of Castle Black itself, leveraging his strategic prowess. Lord Umber would be put in charge of the main northern host's ground defense, while Roose Bolton would command the wall's central defenses. Robert Baratheon, perhaps to his delight, would command cavalry. Finally, after long hours of intense deliberation, the grim council drew to a close. The grim-faced leaders rose from the table, their chairs scraping across the stone floor. The weight of their decisions pressed heavily upon each of them, but also a grim, desperate determination. They moved towards the door, their steps resolute, their faces hardened. The world was on the brink, and they were the last defense. The cold of the north, the chilling reality of the approaching enemy, now seemed to pervade the very air of Castle Black, seeping into their bones. They filed out of the war room, leaving the large wooden table, its maps, and its weighty decisions behind. The silence of the room, once filled with their voices, now seemed to hold the echoes of a coming battle, the grim certainty of a fight for survival. The long night was truly here, and Westeros, for the first time in millennia, was ready to meet it. 1 comments 0 vote. Long night. 292 AC. The Wall. Third person POV. Every man and woman, from the grizzled Night's Watch veterans to the freshly mustered levies from the south, from the grim northern clansmen to the disciplined legions of the Reach, held their breath, their weapons clutched tight in gloved hands. The air was thick with the scent of fear, of damp wool, and the metallic tang of cold steel. Along the battlements, hundreds of wildfire barrels stood ready, their wicks primed, their contents an ominous green glow in the gloom. Catapults and scorpions, massive war engines assembled with feverish haste, were aimed towards the unknown, their mechanisms groaning under the tension of their loaded payloads. The silence was absolute, broken only by the shriek of the wind and the nervous shifting of feet on the icy battlements. Below, stretching into the abyssal blackness of the land of always winter, nothing could be seen. The night was a profound, suffocating dark, deeper than any natural shadow, impenetrable by torchlight. It was as if the world itself had swallowed the enemy whole. Then, a low, guttural rumbling began. It came from the very foundations of the wall, from deep beneath the colossal ice. A soft, growing vibration that resonated through the stone and ice, rising steadily, chillingly. It was the sound of something immense, something countless, approaching from the other side. The rumbling grew louder, a deep, resonant growl that shook the very ground. It was the sound of a vast, unseen multitude, advancing with an inexorable, terrifying momentum. The cold intensified, seeping into the very marrow of their bones, a precursor to the unnatural chill that was about to descend. Then, the rumbling was joined by a sickening, rhythmic thudding. It was the sound of bodies hitting the gates, the massive, reinforced steel and iron doors at the foot of the wall. Not just a few, but a continuous, grinding impact, a relentless battering that spoke of sheer, overwhelming numbers. The gatehouse groaned, protesting under the strain, a horrifying echo in the darkness. A guttural roar ripped through the night, a chilling, inhuman sound that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the approaching darkness. It was the signal. From the central command tower of Castle Black, a single, fiery beacon flared into the night sky, its crimson glow piercing the gloom. It was the pre-arranged signal. Fire. The command boomed from 1,000 throats along the wall's length. Drop the wildfire. Loose the arrows. With a synchronized effort, the wildfire barrels were released. They tumbled from the top of the wall, dark, ominous shapes plummeting into the unseen void below. They struck the ground with sickening thuds, some cracking open, spewing their viscous, glowing green contents into the darkness. Then, a rain of fire arrows followed. Thousands of flaming projectiles streaked downwards, tracing fiery arcs against the blackness. They landed amongst the fallen barrels, igniting the spilled wildfire with a furious, instantaneous burst of green-tinged flame. A colossal, emerald inferno erupted at the foot of the wall. The sudden, unnatural light illuminated a scene of unimaginable horror and staggering scale. They could now see the dead. They were not a marching army, but a vast, undulating wave of corpses. Humans, their bodies desiccated, skeletal, or horribly bloated, pressed forward with an unstoppable, mindless purpose. They were a living tide of death, their numbers beyond counting. Interspersed among the human dead were grotesque, horrifying forms. Lumbering giants, their immense bodies shambling forward, their dead eyes burning with cold blue light. Animals, bears, wolves, great elk, distorted and skeletal, their flesh ripped, but still moving with chilling, unnatural speed. And worst of all, scuttling on countless legs, terrifyingly swift, were monstrous, skeletal ice spiders, their icy eyes glowing with malevolent intelligence, their venomous fangs glinting in the green light. The sight was a nightmare made real, a horrifying, endless mass of death. As the green flames illuminated the horrors below, a chilling new sight emerged from the perpetual gloom above the horde. Against the backdrop of the icy sky, dragons with glowing blue eyes descended. These were the former wild dragons of Dragonstone, now resurrected, their bodies mottled with rime and decay, their roars replaced by rasping, guttural sounds of death. There were 20 of them, led by the colossal, undead form of Cannibal. Their descent was swift, terrifying, straight for the wall. Upon the wall, the ice dragon riders of Asgard, mounted on their magnificent, living dragons, reacted instantly. They had been patrolling, anticipating this. Their beasts, their scales shimmering with ethereal light, were already in motion. Engage them. Do not let them touch the wall. The command rippled through the northern riders, their voices firm, devoid of fear. With piercing shrieks that cut through the cold air, the ice dragons surged forward. They were slightly larger than many of the undead dragons, their living forms more agile, their movements fluid and powerful. They met the charging undead dragons head-on, a clash of elemental forces. The sky became a maelstrom of beating wings, clashing scales, and roaring beasts. The ice dragons fought with a savage grace, their bodies imbued with ancient power. They aimed to intercept, to push back, to distract. Their primary objective: to hold off the dead dragons so they could not destroy the wall. It was a desperate aerial ballet, a swirling dogfight against overwhelming odds. While this aerial battle raged, a terrifying new threat emerged. The wargs, their minds pushed to their limits, their visions strained by the chaos below, managed to pinpoint a specific target. A message, urgent and terrifying, flashed through the telepathic network to the command tower. Euron Greyjoy, on a dead dragon, size of Vermithor, approaching fast. Indeed, a massive, undead dragon, its decaying wings beating with sickening force, was visible now, separate from the main aerial engagement. Upon its rime-covered back sat a dark, lone figure, his form distorted by the distance, but his intent clear. It was Euron Greyjoy, heading directly for the wall. He was fast, his undead mount seemingly impervious to the constant struggle of the other wild dragons. As he drew near, his form became clearer. In his hand, raised high, was the dragonhorn, its obsidian surface glowing with an ominous, pulsating light. When he was near the wall, within striking distance, Euron brought the horn to his lips. He took a deep breath, and unleashed a chilling, resonant blast that cut through the sounds of battle, a sound of ancient, binding magic. Below, in the encampments, the Targaryen-bonded fire dragons began to react. Their majestic heads snapped up, their eyes widening in pain and confusion. They started to struggle, to buck, to defy the commands of their riders. The bond, a deep, ancient connection between dragon and rider, was immense, but it was being strained to its very limit. The horn's power was agonizing, a psychic assault on their very wills. Their riders, the Targaryen princes and princesses, gripped their saddles, their faces pale with effort. They began to speak, to urge, to command their dragons in High Valyrian, their voices filled with desperate pleas. Calm, my love, resist. Remember our bond. Remember your rider. The dragons roared in defiance, their bodies writhing, their minds locked in a terrifying battle against the horn's dark magic. Some bucked so violently that their riders clung on for dear life. Euron Greyjoy, a maniacal grin splitting his face, raised his horn again, preparing for a second, even more devastating blast, and urged his undead mount to breathe fire at the wall, aiming to unleash a full blow. At that critical moment, a new, powerful roar ripped through the sky. From behind the Targaryen encampment, moving with a speed that belied his massive size, Prince Brandon Stark entered the fray. He was astride his own ice dragon, Winter, a magnificent beast of crystalline scales and icy breath. Winter, responding to Brandon's urgent command, soared directly into Euron's path. Brandon, a grim determination on his face, maneuvered Winter with expert precision, intercepting Euron just as the madman was about to unleash the full force of his undead dragon's breath upon the wall. The two dragons collided in midair, a sickening crunch of ice and decaying bone against living scale. The impact diverted Euron's dragon, sending its fiery breath harmlessly into the snowy plain to the side. However, a section of the wall's top, already weakened by the fading magic, was caught in the periphery of the blow. The stone and ice groaned, a massive crack snaking across its surface, and a chunk of the battlement was damaged. But it still held. The line was bent, but not broken. A collective sigh of relief swept through the soldiers on the wall, a ragged, desperate sound of triumph. Brandon Stark had arrived just in time. Euron Greyjoy, his eyes blazing with fury at the interruption, urged his undead dragon to engage Winter. The two dragons, one of living ice, one of undead fire, clashed in a brutal, aerial duel. Brandon and Euron fought with their dragons for a while, a terrifying dance of death in the frigid sky. Winter moved with powerful, deliberate strikes, attempting to overwhelm the undead beast, while Euron's dragon, fueled by dark magic, was relentless, feeling no pain. Brandon, his face grim, realized this prolonged engagement was dangerous. He looked at the struggling Targaryen dragons below, their minds still battling the horn. He needed to end this. Now. With a cold, calculating resolve, Brandon changed into his half-lycan form. His body swelled, muscles rippling under his clothes. His skin hardened, his teeth sharpened, and his eyes glowed with an animalistic intensity. He quickly removed his harness, letting it fall, and stood, balanced precariously, on Winter's back. As Winter gained the upper hand, Pushing Euron's undead dragon higher, gaining superior position, Brandon seized the moment. With a powerful, almost inhuman leap, he jumped from Winter's back onto the decaying hide of the undead dragon. He landed on its back with a sickening crunch. His sharpened nails embedded themselves deep into the dead dragon's leathery, icy skin, providing a firm grip, preventing him from being dislodged by its writhing. Euron, turning to face this impossible attack, looked utterly shocked, his single blue eye widening in disbelief. He had not anticipated such a desperate, feral move. Brandon moved with the speed of a predator. Before Euron could fully react, before he could raise the horn again, Brandon lunged. His powerful, transformed hand clamped around Euron's neck, twisting with brutal, efficient force. With a sickening snap, Brandon took his head, cleanly severing it from his body. Euron's body slumped, lifeless, falling from the dragon's back into the darkness below. As Euron's headless corpse tumbled, the dragon horn, clutched at his waist, became visible. Brandon snatched it, his grip firm. With a primal roar of triumph, he brought his other hand down, crushing the ancient, obsidian horn into countless fragments. The dark, binding magic that had tormented the dragons immediately dissipated, a palpable wave of freedom washing over the Targaryen beasts below. Brandon then ordered Winter, telepathically, to come near him. His own ice dragon, its eyes blazing with fierce pride, moved swiftly. Brandon, still in his half-lichen form, leapt back onto Winter's back, his powerful legs absorbing the impact. With the horn gone, Brandon turned his attention back to Euron's now riderless dead dragon. It was a still dangerous threat, a puppet of the Night King's will. With a roar of grim determination, Brandon reached for one of the dragonglass spears that were attached to Winter's saddle, prepared for just such an encounter. He aimed, then thrust with all his might. The dragonglass spear, sharp as a razor and imbued with the magic of the north, pierced the dead dragon's neck, shattering its icy core, delivering a final, definitive blow. The undead dragon shuddered, its blue eyes fading, and it plunged from the sky, a lifeless hulk. Brandon's chest heaved. He had done it. He had removed Euron, destroyed the horn, and cleared the way. He was about to raise his hand, about to send the signal to King Maekar, about to command the fire dragons to unleash their fury upon the dead, now that they were free. But before he could finish giving the command, a new, colossal shadow fell over the wall. A terrifying, rasping roar tore through the air, shaking the very ice. He looked up, and then he saw it. Cannibal, the largest of the undead dragons, its immense, black, decaying body now flying at full speed, directly towards the wall. It was a horrifying vision of ancient power resurrected. Cannibal, unchecked and unbound, opened its massive maw. A torrent of blue, unnatural fire erupted from its throat, a chilling, destructive inferno. It was not mere flame, but something colder, more potent, a deathly fire that seemed to consume life itself. The blue fire washed over a section of the wall, not far from where the previous damage had occurred. The ancient ice groaned, protested, then fractured. With a deafening, cataclysmic roar, a vast section of the wall was destroyed, crumbling inwards, sending tons of ice and stone crashing to the ground. A gaping gap now stood in the shield of Westeros. And through it, with an unstoppable, relentless surge, the dead started moving. The endless wave of the dead, no longer held back, poured through the breach, their numbers seemingly infinite, their blue eyes burning with cold malice. The long night had truly begun. 0 comments 0 vote. Long night 2. 292 AC. The wall. Third person POV. The roaring cacophony of ice and stone tearing apart vibrated through every bone in the bodies of the 30,000 soldiers manning the wall. Cannibal's unnatural blue fire had done its devastating work. A vast, jagged gap now yawned in the 1,000-foot-high barrier, spewing chunks of ice and shattered rock down onto the plains below. The impenetrable shield of Westeros, a sentinel for millennia, had been breached. Through that gaping wound, a horrifying, relentless tide surged. The sounds of the dead, no longer merely rumbling beneath the ice, rose to a guttural, terrifying roar, a sound of mindless hunger and ancient malice. They came, a continuous, unending torrent, pouring through the shattered section of the wall like water through a broken dam. Below, the green inferno of the wildfire still burned, consuming swaths of the dead. But their numbers were infinite. They flowed over the flames, trampling their burning brethren, their frozen flesh sizzling, but still they came, a relentless wave of death. First through the breach surged the smaller dead, reanimated human corpses, skeletal and gaunt, their eyes burning with an eerie blue light, their decaying limbs scrambling over each other in a grotesque rush. They moved with an unnatural speed, an uncanny, silent purpose, their numbers overwhelming. Behind them came the true horrors. Lumbering giants, their immense forms now animated by the Night King's will, their frozen, muscled bodies moving with an unstoppable momentum. They pushed through the ranks of smaller dead, their great, ice-covered clubs rising and falling with terrifying force, smashing aside anything in their path. Twisting, scuttling, and skittering with sickening speed were the grotesque, many-legged forms of ice spiders. They were nightmare creatures, larger than horses, their segmented bodies covered in crystalline fur, their fangs dripping with icy venom. They moved with a chilling intelligence, darting through the slower dead, their blue eyes blazing with predatory hunger. The frozen earth literally shook as the sheer volume of the dead poured through the breach. Animals, twisted and malformed, wolves with shredded fur, bears with splintered bones, massive undead elk, their antlers like frozen branches, added to the terrifying press. It was not an army marching, it was an entire ecosystem of the dead, returning to reclaim the living world. On top of the wall, near the breach, a desperate, valiant defense was already underway. 30,000 soldiers, a mix of northern and southern forces, faced the terrifying reality of the onslaught. Archers, focus fire on the breach. Lord Robert Baratheon's booming voice, raw with urgency, cut through the din. He stood near the crumbling edge, a massive warhammer already in his hand, his face grim but resolute. Loose, loose. Thousands of arrows, tipped with dragonglass, rained down into the swirling mass below. The dragonglass arrows, rarer and more potent, sizzled as they struck the dead, shattering their forms with a burst of icy mist, a tiny but vital victory against their numbers. Wildfire catapults. Target the choke point. Keep them burning, shouted Lord Tywin Lannister, his voice cold and precise, emanating from the command tower at Castle Black. He oversaw the coordination, his strategic mind already adapting to the overwhelming, impossible foe. His Lannister legions, disciplined and unyielding, formed a grim line along the battlements, their crossbows raining bolts into the breach. Down at the foot of the breach, where the dead first spilled onto the human side of the wall, the advance elements of the army had already formed desperate shield walls. Knights from the Reach, their polished armor now grimed with ice and gore, stood alongside grim northern spearmen and the unyielding disciplined forces of the Crownlands. Hold the line. Lord Umber's guttural roar echoed across the grinding chaos. His giant figure, leading a contingent of grim northern spearmen, stood at the forefront, his great axe already red with icy blood. They cannot break us. Stand firm. Spearmen, their long shafts bristling like a porcupine's quills, met the initial surge, thrusting into the oncoming dead. The shield walls, a desperate human dam, buckled under the sheer pressure of the ceaseless tide, but they held them back, for now. The sound was a sickening cacophony of splintering wood, grinding ice, and the wet thud of impact. Above the wall, the sky had become a terrifying battlefield. The ice dragons, already soaring, moved with a silent, preternatural speed. They were slightly larger than many of the undead dragons, and their living forms were more agile. They intercepted the blue-eyed horrors head-on, a desperate aerial ballet of life against undeath. Meanwhile, the 10 Targaryen fire dragons, recently freed from the Dragonhorn's agonizing influence, now flew low over the massive torrent of dead pouring through the breach. They did not linger. Instead, they performed terrifying, calculated passes. With guttural roars of pure fire, they would dive, unleashing torrents of scorching flame onto the endlessly surging dead. The fire consumed vast swaths of corpses, turning them into sizzling, smoking ash, momentarily creating gaps in the wave of undeath, giving the beleaguered soldiers below a precious few seconds of room to breathe. Then, with powerful thrusts of their wings, they would bank sharply and soar upwards, avoiding entanglement with the overwhelming numbers of dead dragons and the relentless ground horde. Their fire, a vibrant orange-red against the sickly green of the wildfire, was a terrifyingly effective weapon, turning death into dust. Keep them clear. Prince Aelor Targaryen, riding his own dragon, Tessarion, commanded other fire dragon riders from above, his voice relayed by telegram to the ground commanders. Burn the choke points. Give our men space. He coordinated the fiery aerial attacks, ensuring they were precise and maximized their impact. As the grim battle raged, a new, chilling roar split the sky. From the desolate depths of the land of always winter, a colossal shadow surged forward, faster than any other undead beast. It was Cannibal, the largest of the undead dragons, its immense, black, decaying body now fully animated by the Night King's malevolent will. It flew with a terrifying purpose, ignoring the melee around it, heading directly for the already breached section of the wall, intent on widening the gap. Prince Brandon Stark, astride his own ice dragon, Winter, saw it. His eyes, in his half-lichened form, were burning with a cold, focused fury. He had just dispatched Euron Greyjoy, but the fight was far from over. Cannibal was the Night King's ultimate weapon, a horrifying symbol of the threat. Winter. Now. Intercept Cannibal. Do not let it reach the wall. Brandon's telepathic command was sharp, urgent. Winter, a magnificent beast of crystalline scales and icy breath, responded instantly, surging towards the monstrous undead dragon. The two colossal dragons met in a clash that shook the very air. Ice against reanimated flesh and bone. Winter fought with a primal ferocity, its claws raking, its icy breath attempting to encase Cannibal in a freezing shroud. Cannibal, driven by the Night King's cold will, was relentless, lunging with decayed fangs, attempting to tear at Winter's living flesh. Just as the two behemoths locked in a terrifying aerial struggle, Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, riding his majestic red dragon, Meryx's, soared into the fray. He had seen Cannibal's trajectory, seen Brandon's desperate interception. Brandon. Rhaegar's voice cut through the wind, his concern evident. I'm with you. We take this beast together. Meryx's unleashed a torrent of fire, searing Cannibal's already decaying hide, causing it to shriek, a sound of agony and rage. The combined might of a living ice dragon and a living fire dragon, two of the largest of their kind, was now arrayed against the monstrous undead serpent. As the three dragons engaged in their titanic struggle, Brandon's heightened senses, sharpened by his lichen form, suddenly screamed danger. A cold, distinct presence, a malevolent will, pierced the chaos. He instinctively ducked his body, a sudden, jerking movement that saved his life. A spear of impossibly sharp ice whistled past his head, so close he felt the frigid wind of its passage. It would have impaled him clean through. Brandon's eyes snapped to the direction the spear had come from. There, far above the main battle, silhouetted against the dark, desolate horizon, stood the Night King. He was not alone. Around him, a retinue of White Walkers stood silent and watchful, their blue eyes burning. The Night King's gaze was fixed on Brandon, a chilling, ancient malice. The warg's earlier messages had pinpointed Euron, but the Night King himself had been elusive. Now, he revealed himself, a silent, terrifying figure of ultimate command. Brandon's blood ran cold, but his resolve solidified. This was the moment. The plan. Rhaegar. Brandon roared, his voice carrying above the din. Continue engaging Cannibal. Do not let it move. Keep it away from the wall. Then, with a swift, decisive movement, Brandon urged Winter. Winter. As low as you can. To the cavalry unit. Swiftly. Winter dipped sharply, streaking downwards, dodging blows from Cannibal and the other undead dragons, making a beeline for the human lines. It soared low over the teeming encampments, heading for the section where the cavalry unit, a massive formation of heavy horse, stood prepared. As Winter swooped to within meters of the ground, Brandon, still in his half-lichen form, jumped from the dragon's back. He landed with powerful, agile grace, tucking and rolling, then springing to his feet. He immediately spotted Lord Robert Baratheon, mounted on a massive black destrier, surrounded by the finest knights and horsemen of the Stormlands, the Reach, and the North. Robert was clad in his war plate, his hammer gripped in his gauntleted hand, his face grimly eager. Brandon ran towards him, his lichen speed astonishing. He leapt, grasping the stirrup, and with a powerful heave, pulled himself up behind Robert on the massive destrier's back. The horse snorted, surprised but not panicked. Robert. Brandon's voice was raw, urgent, filled with a grim triumph. I've seen him. The Night King. He's watching us. He's out there. We should prepare to march. Now. Robert Baratheon's eyes, previously filled with battle fury against the dead at the wall, widened slightly as he recognized Brandon, then the true import of his words. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face, a flash of his predatory joy. About bloody time, Stark. Robert roared, his voice booming across the assembled cavalry. I was waiting for this. Let's give that icy bastard a taste of human steel and fire. He turned his head, his gaze sweeping the battlefield, seeking out a specific figure in the sky. He spotted Prince Aelor Targaryen, riding his fire dragon Tessarion, still coordinating the fiery passes above the breach. Aelor. Robert bellowed, his voice carrying like thunder, a voice that had led charges and broken armies. Aelor. The cavalry will be charging. Prepare the way. Make sure our path is clear as we go. Burn a path for us. Prince Aelor, high above, heard the call. He looked down, saw Robert's grimly triumphant face, and then Brandon Stark's half-lichen form behind him. He understood. The signal. The Night King had been found. Aelor nodded, his face grim, and barked commands to the other fire dragon riders through their telepathic bonds. Form up. 2 columns. Clear the path. The cavalry charges. For the living. With a synchronized roar, the fire dragons rearranged themselves. They flew low, side by side, their massive forms becoming living flamethrowers. They began to breathe fire in 2 continuous columns, searing the ground, melting snow, turning frozen earth into steaming mud. The scorching inferno advanced in a terrifying, purposeful line, creating a fiery tunnel through the endless, teeming wave of the dead. It was a path cleared by dragonfire, a blazing, impossible road carved directly into the heart of the enemy. The cavalry, seeing the fiery path, let out a thunderous cheer, their horses pawing the ground, eager to charge into the inferno, towards the ultimate confrontation. The long night had truly begun, and the living, led by a Stark and a Baratheon, were charging directly into its heart. 1 comments 0 vote. Long night 3. 292 AC. Beyond the wall. Third-person POV. The roaring inferno, a dual column of dragonfire, ripped through the endless tide of the dead, carving a blazing, impossible path through the frigid darkness. It was a tunnel of living flame, roaring fiercely, melting snow and steaming the ancient ice, illuminating the horrors of the oncoming horde with a searing, green-tinged light. Behind this fiery vanguard, the ground thundered. Lord Robert Baratheon, atop his mighty black destrier, led the charge, a living whirlwind of fury. By his side, riding with an almost unnerving calm, was Prince Brandon Stark, still in his half-lichen form, his muscles rippling, his dark eyes burning with an unholy light. Forward! Forward, you bastards! For the living! Robert's voice, a primal roar that tore through the din of battle, was the rallying cry for the cavalry. For the living! For the living! For the living! For the living! 10,000 heavy horses, their hoofs churning snow and steam, surged forward, their riders grim-faced and determined. They were the spearhead of humanity, plunging into the very heart of death. They burst through the newly made breach in the wall, the roar of the undead rising to a deafening crescendo around them. The cold was immediate, absolute, a palpable presence that assaulted their lungs. But the dragon's fire carved a path, a momentary respite from the overwhelming numbers. Robert, a monstrous figure of rage and strength, wielded his dragonglass warhammer, its massive head shimmering with obsidian shards, an axe blade glinting on its reverse. With every swing, the hammer crushed skeletal warriors, shattering their frozen forms with explosive force. The axe blade bit deep into the flesh of lumbering undead beasts, cleaving through bone and sinew. He was a force of nature, a thunderbolt of vengeance. Die, you bastards! Die again! Robert bellowed, a spray of icy gore rising with each devastating blow. His eyes, fixed on the distant horizon where the Night King likely waited, burned with a furious, joyous hatred. For the realm, for the living. Beside him, Brandon moved with a chilling efficiency. He wielded 2 swords, gleaming blades forged with magic, Theo, and John, the very same weapons he had mastered in a previous life. He was a whirlwind of precision, his movements economical, every strike devastating. Stay tight. Keep the line. Brandon's voice, sharper, more guttural in his lichen form, cut through the din, guiding the charge. Do not break formation. We are a spear, not a scattered hand. Theo, in his right hand, moved with a fluid grace, severing heads and limbs with effortless precision. John, in his left, met blows with a steely clang, deflecting attacks and parrying unseen dangers. His strikes were not wild flurries, but surgical cuts, aimed at shattering the reanimated forms with minimal effort. Where Robert was a brutal force, Brandon was a deadly instrument, cutting a path with surgical fury. They cut open the path like a spear penetrating the dead, their horses trampling the smaller corpses, their blades and hammers shattering the larger ones. The dead clawed at them, their icy fingers scrabbling at armor, but the momentum of the charge was unstoppable. Blood, black and congealed, sprayed into the air, mingling with the chilling mist of shattered ice. They're thicker than anticipated, Robert roared, his face grim despite the thrill of combat. Keep that fire coming, Aylar. As the cavalry, a burning spearhead, tore deeper into the endless horde, a chilling new threat emerged. High above them, maintaining the fiery path, was one of the fire dragons, its scales glowing, unleashing a continuous torrent of flame onto the swarming dead. From the distant, icy horizon, a figure stood motionless amidst a retinue of white walkers. It was the Night King. His gaze, cold and ancient, fixed on the burning dragon, a flicker of malevolence in his blue eyes. With a slow, deliberate movement, the Night King raised his hand. From the very air, a spear of impossibly sharp ice materialized in his grasp, shimmering with an unearthly blue light. He raised it, his arm moving with an unnerving, effortless grace. Then, he hurled it. The ice spear flew with silent, terrifying speed, a bolt of pure, destructive cold. It streaked through the night, a direct, lethal trajectory towards the fire dragon. The spear struck the dragon's leg, piercing its thick, scaly flesh with a sickening thud. The dragon let out a piercing roar of agony, a sound of immense pain and shock that cut through the sounds of battle. Its coordinated flame faltered, stuttering. The wounded dragon thrashed, its powerful body reeling from the unexpected blow. Its rider, a young Targaryen prince, desperately clung to its saddle, his face contorted with pain for his beloved beast. The dragon, no longer able to maintain its precise fire column, roared once more in defiance and pain, then instinctively began to fly high, seeking to recuperate, to gain altitude away from the immediate danger, its flame sputtering. The fiery path began to waver, threatening to collapse. The Night King, his face devoid of emotion, his eyes fixed on the struggling dragon, began to materialize another spear in his hand. He was preparing to unleash another lethal blow, to take down another of the critical fire-breathing guardians. Brandon Stark saw it. He saw the first spear strike. He saw the dragon's agonizing roar. And he saw the Night King, already preparing the second. His mind, quick and decisive, recognized the immediate, dire threat. Losing another dragon, especially now, would spell disaster for the charge, for the entire battle. Not this time, you icy bastard. Brandon snarled, his voice a guttural growl that was half human, half wolf. Without hesitation, with a movement born of ancient training and desperate need, Brandon pulled one of his swords from his grasp. It was Theo. With a powerful, whipping motion of his arm, Brandon threw Theo not at the Night King himself, but directly in the path of the shimmering ice spear. The magical steel, sharp and imbued with ancient magic, met the ice spear in midair. There was a bright flash of light, a crackling sound, and the spear, the Night King's lethal projectile, shattered into 1,000 glittering fragments of ice. Theo, having completed its grim task, continued its trajectory, landing with a soft thud on the frozen ground some distance away. The Night King, his hand still raised, his cold eyes fixed on the point where his spear should have been, paused. His head tilted almost imperceptibly. He saw his spear miss, saw it shatter. Then, his chilling blue gaze shifted, pinpointing the source of the sword. His eyes locked onto Brandon Stark, who was still charging at him, a blur of grim determination and deadly intent, astride Robert's horse. A flicker, almost imperceptible, of something akin to interest, or perhaps even recognition, crossed the Night King's ancient, frozen face. He had found his challenger. As Brandon continued his relentless charge, his eyes never leaving the Night King, he performed a subtle, yet astonishing feat of will. Theo. Brandon's voice, though a guttural command, resonated with a powerful, innate connection. He called his sword back. And just as he spoke, Theo, lying inert on the ground, began to shimmer. Then, miraculously, impossibly, it began to levitate. Slowly at first, then gaining speed, the magical steel blade flew through the air, directly towards Brandon. It angled precisely, its hilt turning, and with a soft thud, it settled perfectly back into Brandon's empty hand. All this happened as he continued his thunderous charge, his focus unwavering. The cavalry roared around them, a furious wave of steel and fury, cutting through the endless tide of the dead. Brandon and Robert were at its very tip, a living spear aimed at the heart of the darkness. He felt that one, Robert. Brandon snarled, his eyes fixed on the Night King. He's watching us. He knows we're coming. Good. Robert bellowed back, his voice raw with excitement, smashing a shambling giant with his hammer. Let the icy bastard watch. Let him see the wrath of the living. This is what I was born for, Stark. To smash things. And that frozen face needs smashing. Hold your fervor for the king, Robert. Brandon cautioned, cutting down 2 undead horsemen who tried to flank them. He's the target. Keep the path clear. No diversions. Always the strategist, even when charging death itself. Robert chuckled, though his eyes were grim. This is a hell of a ride, Brandon. Better than any tourney. Better than any boar hunt. This is the last hunt, Robert. Brandon replied, his voice chilling. For all of us, this is the only chance. They cut through the dead like scythes through wheat, their horses tireless, their determination absolute. The fiery path created by the dragons flickered, maintained by the remaining fire dragons, creating a blazing tunnel through the dark sea of corpses. The wall. It's holding. Robert roared, glancing back at the immense ice barrier, now a distant, damaged silhouette. Ayler's doing a fine job keeping them clear. He's buying us time. Brandon shot back, his eyes scanning the horde ahead. Time we must use. The Night King will not wait forever. He knows our intent now. The thought of what lay ahead, of facing a being of pure ice and death, was terrifying. But for Brandon, it was also a grim imperative, a destiny long acknowledged. For Robert, it was the ultimate battle, a chance for glory against the greatest foe imaginable. They plunged deeper into the ranks of the dead, their charge relentless, their eyes fixed on the chilling figure of the Night King, a silent, menacing beacon in the distance. The sounds of battle behind them, the screams of the living, the endless moan of the dead, began to fade, replaced by the thundering hooves of their charge, and the grim beat of their own hearts. They were coming. 2 comments 0 vote. Long Night 4. 292 AC. Beyond the Wall. Third-person POV. As they rode, the swirling chaos around them slowly began to thin, not because the dead had vanished, but because they were concentrating. The sheer density of the reanimated bodies gave way to a more structured, terrifying formation. Then, against the desolate, frozen horizon, framed by the pale, eerie light of the true north, they saw them. The true enemy. The Night King. He stood motionless, a figure of absolute stillness, his form cloaked in shadow and ancient ice. Before him, arrayed in a silent, chilling guard, stood his lieutenants, 50 White Walkers, their skin bone white, their eyes burning with malevolent blue light, their crystalline blades glinting in the pale gloom. And before them, a dense, unyielding mass of 3,000 whites, their numbers a chilling testament to the scale of the Night King's power. These were not the shambling, mindless dead they had been cutting through. These were the freshest, the strongest, the most recently reanimated, their movements more coordinated, their hunger more palpable. They formed a gruesome, living shield around their master. Of the 10,000 cavalry who had charged through the wall's breach, only half remained. 5,000 riders, their horses lathered with sweat and foam, their armor dented, their faces grimed with frost and gore, now stood before the ultimate confrontation. Their numbers were dwindling, their breath ragged, but their resolve was unbroken. Brandon Stark, still in his half-lichened form, felt the cold prick of exhaustion, but his mind was sharp, focused on the ultimate prize. He looked at Robert Baratheon beside him, the Lord of Storm's End, who, despite the carnage, still bore a terrifying grin, his eyes blazing with the anticipation of battle. Robert, Brandon roared, his voice cutting through the rising din. Continue to charge. Do not waver. This is it. Then, Brandon twisted in his saddle, his voice carrying back to the weary, battle-hardened riders behind them. Listen to me. We are moving. Do not stop until I, our Lord Robert, reach the Night King. His voice was a primal call, igniting the last reserves of strength in the remaining cavalry. Take care of those minions. Smash them. But we are going for the head. He raised his sword, Theo above his head, the blade shimmering with a cold, living light. His voice, amplified by his lichened form, became a guttural, defiant roar. For the living. The cry was taken up by the 5,000 remaining cavalry, a ragged, desperate cheer that echoed across the frozen plains. For the living. The cavalry surged forward once more, their horses pounding the ice, a desperate, unstoppable momentum. The 3,000 whites, a truly formidable barrier, moved to intercept them, their bone-hard bodies colliding with the charge. The sounds of combat escalated into a deafening, sickening roar of clashing steel, splintering bone, and human cries. The soldiers behind Brandon and Robert threw themselves into the fray, cutting, smashing, and burning their way through the tide of whites. They were disciplined, brave, but also driven by the primal fear of what lay beyond if they failed. They were buying time, carving a path for their leaders. For what felt like an eternity, the battle raged, a brutal, horrifying stalemate against the endless horde. The minutes stretched, agonizingly slow. The whites, tireless and relentless, threw themselves against the cavalry, attempting to overwhelm them with sheer numbers. But the living fought with a desperate ferocity, their morale fueled by the knowledge that the fate of the world rested on their charge. After 15 grueling minutes of relentless combat, a small, elite group of warriors had pierced the white lines. They were the very best, the most skilled, the most determined fighters in Westeros, their strength and courage having carried them through the chaos. At their forefront were Prince Brandon Stark and Lord Robert Baratheon, grim-faced, their weapons dripping with the icy ichor of the dead. Behind them rode 40 men, the cream of the realm's warriors. There was Esser Barristan Selmy, the White Bull, an aging but still formidable figure of the Kingsguard, his Valyrian steel blade a blur of motion. Esser Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, his legendary blade dawn glowing faintly in the dim light, its movements impossibly swift. Lord William Dustin, a grim northern lord, his axe a terrifying extension of his will. Lord Bryden Tully, the Blackfish, his calm demeanor belying a fierce cunning, his movements economical and deadly. Lord Roderick Forrester, a stalwart Northman, was fighting with the desperation of one defending his home. Esser Jorah Mormont, his face grim, fighting with the stoic resolve of a bear. And many others, the finest knights and most hardened warriors from every corner of Asgard and the Seven Kingdoms, their names soon to be legends, their faces etched with the cold certainty of their mission. They forged a new, smaller spearhead, driving relentlessly towards the 50 White Walkers and their silent, terrifying master. The White Walkers moved. They were not mindless automatons like the Whites. They were ancient, intelligent, and impossibly swift. Their crystalline blades, sharp as razors, shimmered with an unholy light, emanating an intense cold that caused breath to freeze in the air. Brandon roared, his voice a guttural command as they met the first line of White Walkers. Focus your attacks. Aim for the heart. They shatter. He himself moved with blinding speed, a terrifying blend of human skill and lycan ferocity. Two White Walkers glided towards him, their icy blades raised. Brandon ducked under the first, his Theo slicing upwards, shattering its crystalline arm. Before the second could react, Jon flashed across, piercing its chest. The White Walker exploded into a shower of icy shards, its blue eyes fading into nothingness. Robert Baratheon met a towering White Walker head-on. His dragonglass warhammer, its obsidian edge shimmering, smashed axe head into the creature's chest. The impact resonated with a terrifying force, shattering the White Walker into 1,000 pieces of ice and dust. Take that, you frozen bastard! Robert bellowed, his voice filled with a desperate, furious triumph. Ser Barristan Selmy, his movements surprisingly fluid for his age, danced around a White Walker, his Valyrian steel blade darting like a serpent, finding vital points, shattering its icy armor with precise, practiced strikes. Ser Arthur Dayne, a beacon of lethal grace, engaged two White Walkers simultaneously. Dawn, his pale greatsword, seemed to glow brighter as it moved, its edges singing as it met the ice blades, shattering them with impossible ease. He moved with a chilling efficiency, a master at work. They were cutting through the White Walkers, but each one was a formidable foe, demanding absolute focus and skill. The battle was a blur of flashing steel, shattering ice, and desperate shouts. The cold radiated from the White Walkers, intensifying the frigid air, threatening to freeze them where they stood. Brandon, his focus absolute, moved relentlessly forward. He was a force of pure, unwavering determination. He saw the Night King, a silent, static figure, seemingly observing the chaos with detached interest. He's mine. Brandon snarled, a low growl that was barely audible above the sounds of combat, meant only for himself. He had seen the Night King's face before, in the whispers of prophecy, in the chilling tales of the long night. This was his true enemy. He engaged another White Walker, a particularly large one. It struck with a sweeping blow of its icy blade, but Brandon parried with Jon, his muscles straining. With Theo, he stabbed upwards, piercing its chest. The White Walker exploded, showering him in icy dust. He cleared his path, his eyes never leaving the Night King. He pushed forward, leaving the remaining 40 warriors to deal with the last of the White Walker guard and the continuing press of the Whites. This was his fight. Then, with a final surge, Brandon found himself directly before the Night King. The Night King stood utterly motionless, his ancient, skeletal face devoid of emotion. His piercing blue eyes, twin points of malevolent cold, fixed on Brandon, seeming to see not just the man, but the very essence of the life within him. He raised his own crystalline blade, a weapon of pure ice, radiating an impossible cold. Brandon did not hesitate. His grip tightened on Theo and Jon, the steel humming faintly, as if eager for this final clash. His lycan form seemed to hum with primal power, a direct challenge to the ancient death before him. With a primal roar, a defiance against all the cold and silence, Brandon lunged. He raised Theo high, aiming for the Night King's head. The Night King, with a speed that defied his stillness, met the blow. Brandon's sword, Theo, and the Night King's crystalline blade clashed. A terrifying, high-pitched shriek of grinding metal and shattering ice ripped through the air, an unholy sound that vibrated through the very bones of all who heard it. Sparks, both fiery and icy, flew from the impact. The final battle had begun. 3 comments 0 vote. Long Night 5. 292 AC. Beyond the Wall. Third-person POV. The clash resonated, a terrifying shriek of steel and ice that silenced all other sounds for a fleeting, impossible moment. Brandon Stark's sword, Theo, met the Night King's crystalline blade, sparks, both fiery and icy, erupting from the point of contact. The raw power emanating from the Night King was immense, a palpable wave of ancient cold that pressed down on Brandon, threatening to crush him. The Night King moved with an eerie, silent grace, his every movement precise, powerful, and utterly devoid of wasted effort. He was slightly stronger than Brandon, even with the prince in his formidable half-lycan form. Each parry, each block, sent jarring tremors up Brandon's arms, threatening to break his stance. The cold emanating from the Night King was not merely physical, it seeped into the soul, a chilling, ancient malevolence that sought to extinguish all life. Yet, Brandon met force with a superior skill born of countless battles and lifetimes of honed combat. His 2 swords, Theo and Jon, became extensions of his will, a blur of steel dancing around the Night King's single, terrifying ice blade. He moved with a speed that defied the cold, his lycan agility allowing him to weave, duck, and strike with uncanny precision. The Night King thrust with his blade, a silent, deadly lunge aimed at Brandon's heart. Brandon, with a guttural growl, parried with Jon, diverting the strike, the impact shaking his entire frame. Before the Night King could recover, Theo flashed, a deadly silver streak aimed at his exposed side. The Night King parried effortlessly, his ice blade meeting Theo with a shriek of scraping metal. Not while I breathe, you frozen bastard. Brandon snarled, his own voice a raw, animalistic challenge. He pushed forward, a whirlwind of strikes, forcing the Night King to retreat a single, measured step. We are fire. We are fury. We will not freeze. Their blades met again and again, a relentless symphony of destruction. Brandon's strikes were quick, calculated, aiming for the Night King's joints, his neck, any perceived weakness. But the Night King seemed to anticipate every move, his defense flawless, his counterattacks chillingly precise. He wasn't just fighting, he was waiting, assessing, learning. The fight was a brutal, intimate dance of death, the fate of the world hanging on every parry, every thrust. Around them, the sounds of the larger battle raged, the screams of the living, the endless moans of the dead, the clash of steel, the roar of dragons. But in this small, lethal circle, only the whisper of the wind and the clang of their blades mattered. Brandon noticed a pattern. The Night King favored powerful, sweeping strikes, followed by quick, piercing thrusts. His footwork was minimal, almost gliding, relying on subtle shifts of his body to evade. Brandon used his lichen strength to meet the power, and his agility to counter the speed. He feigned a high strike with Theo, then dropped low, sweeping John towards the Night King's legs. The Night King effortlessly parried with a simple downward flick of his wrist, his blade shimmering. He was impossibly fast. Night King flowed into an attack, his ice blade blurring, aiming for Brandon's throat. Brandon parried with John, twisting his body to avoid a follow-up thrust. He lunged with Theo, aiming for the Night King's unarmored chest, a vital spot. The Night King simply shifted, his body barely moving, and the blade harmlessly scraped against what felt like solid rock or ancient ice beneath his cloak. It seemed his entire being was in armor. The fight stretched on, each blow draining Brandon's energy, while the Night King seemed tireless, unfeeling. Brandon's breath came in ragged gasps, his muscles screaming, his senses dulled by the pervasive cold. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that he could not win a prolonged duel of strength. The Night King was simply more. He parried another powerful blow, the force of it driving him back a step. The Night King pressed his advantage, his ice blade a glittering blur, relentless. Brandon saw the opening, but it was a trap. The Night King feigned a strike at his head, then twisted his blade, aiming for Brandon's chest, a lethal, finishing blow. Brandon saw it coming, the inevitable, chilling end. He was too slow, too weary, to fully parry, too rooted to escape. But Brandon was a Stark of Asgard. He was a warg, a lichen, a warrior who understood sacrifice. And he knew how to seize the smallest chance. In a desperate, agonizing decision, Brandon made his choice. He did not try to block with Theo, nor to dodge entirely. Instead, with a raw, defiant cry, he shifted his body, offering a different target. The Night King's ice blade sliced through the air, unerringly fast. It struck Brandon's left arm at the shoulder. The impact was sickening, a sound of tearing flesh and grinding bone. Brandon gasped, a cry of pure agony ripping from his throat as the blade bit deep, severing muscle and sinew, threatening to cut through bone. His left hand, still clutching John, went numb, the sword falling uselessly to the icy ground. Blood, hot and vibrant in the frigid air, gushed from the wound, steaming against the cold. The pain was immediate, blinding, but Brandon fought through it, his lichen form roaring in defiance. It was a calculated risk, a desperate, agonizing sacrifice. With a surge of pure, unadulterated will, Brandon ignored the searing agony in his left arm. He didn't even acknowledge its loss. All his focus, all his remaining strength, poured into his right hand. Even as the Night King's blade finished its devastating cut through his arm, Brandon lunged forward, a raw, primal scream tearing from his throat. His right arm, empowered by his lichen fury and fueled by the willpower that this was his only chance, thrust Theo forward with all his might. His target was the Night King's chest. His sword, Theo, imbued with Brandon's desperation and ancient magic, plunged true. It met no visible resistance, no hard ice or bone. It slid cleanly into the Night King's chest, piercing the very essence of the ancient evil. The Night King's blue eyes widened, for the first time, in something akin to shock, or perhaps, pain. A guttural, unheard sound seemed to echo from deep within him, a silent scream of primordial agony. The cold around them intensified exponentially, a blinding white-blue flash of light erupted from the point of impact, and the Night King's form stiffened, frozen in time. Brandon, Theo buried deep in the Night King's chest, held his ground, his body trembling from exhaustion, agony, and the immense, terrifying power now coursing through his sword. The cold, raw and pure, threatened to engulf him, but the faint warmth of magical steel, now connected to the heart of the Night King, fought against it. The final, impossible gamble had been made. The Night King's rigid form, the embodiment of death, began to shatter. It was not a slow crumbling, but an instantaneous, complete disintegration. His crystalline armor, his skeletal crown, his gaunt face, and his very being exploded outwards in a silent, furious burst of thousands of glittering ice particles. They danced for a fleeting moment in the air, catching the pale, dim light of the frozen sky, then vanished into nothingness, leaving no trace behind but an unimaginable cold. The ultimate evil was gone. The effect on the battlefield was immediate, terrifying, and utterly profound. Across the vast, chaotic plains beyond the wall, where a seemingly endless tide of corpses had been relentlessly surging, a chilling stillness descended. Every single white, every reanimated human, giant, animal, and terrifying ice spider, suddenly froze in place. Their blue eyes, which had burned with malevolent hunger, flickered once, then dimmed, going utterly dark. The mindless, relentless movement ceased. The guttural moans died. The terrifying shuffle of thousands of feet fell silent. For a heartbeat, the battlefield was utterly still, a vast, grotesque diorama of frozen death. The White Walkers, the Night King's silent lieutenants, their imposing forms, their crystalline armor, their impossibly sharp ice blades, all glowed briefly with a fading blue light. Then, with soft, shimmering sounds like breaking glass, they shattered into countless fragments of ice, dissolving into the frigid air, leaving behind only the unbearable cold that had always heralded their presence. Above, the skies cleared with an almost supernatural speed. The now 12 undead dragons, which had been locked in brutal aerial combat with the living dragons, let out final, guttural moans of protest and despair. Their blue eyes dimmed, and their unnatural animation ceased. Their massive, decaying bodies, no longer held aloft by dark magic, shuddered once, then plummeted from the sky. They hit the ice and snow with sickening thuds, falling lifelessly, vast heaps of rotting flesh and shattered bones. The sudden, absolute silence that descended upon the battlefield was deafening. The incessant roar of the dead, the sickening thud of their charge, the clang of steel, the guttural moans, all gone. Replaced by the whistle of the wind and the rapid, ragged breathing of the living. For a stunned, disbelieving moment, the living stood motionless. On the wall, the 25,000 soldiers stared, their weapons still poised, their eyes wide with disbelief. The cavalry, having charged into the heart of the horde, now found themselves surrounded by motionless, rapidly dissolving bodies. The dragon riders, locked in desperate aerial duels, suddenly found their monstrous opponents falling lifelessly from the sky. A collective gasp, a ragged sound of utter disbelief, rippled through the ranks of the living. They blinked, rubbed their eyes, trying to comprehend the impossible. The endless tide of death, the nightmare come real, had simply ceased. Vanished. Then, a single voice, raw with emotion, tore through the silence. From somewhere on the wall, a lone soldier, perhaps a man from the Reach, dropped his sword, his face streaked with tears and grime. He threw back his head and let out a primal, guttural roar. They're gone. They're gone. For the living, the cry was infectious. It spread like wildfire, a wave of realization, of relief, of sheer, overwhelming triumph. One voice became 10, 10 became 100, 100 became 1,000. For the living, the cry thundered from the wall, a defiant, joyous bellow that echoed across the plains, tearing through the cold, silent air. For the living, the cavalry, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten, roared back, their voices hoarse, their weapons raised to the sky in a gesture of absolute, unbridled victory. For the living, the dragon riders, soaring above, joined the chorus, their own triumphant roars mingling with the joyous shouts of their men. From the command tower of Castle Black, Lord Tywin Lannister, usually impassive, felt a tremor of something akin to awe. His eyes, cold and calculating, had seen the impossible achieved. He watched as the last of the whites stopped moving, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He knew the victory was won. He turned to his aide. Signal the horns. Long and sustained. Let all of Westeros know. The dead are broken. On the ground, in the heart of the now dissolving enemy, Lord Robert Baratheon stood amidst the vanishing dead, his dragonglass warhammer dripping with ichor, his face grimed with sweat and blood. He threw back his head, a wild, joyful grin splitting his face, his eyes blazing with a mixture of disbelief and triumphant glee. He had met death, and death had broken. We did it. We did it, you icy bastards. Robert bellowed, his voice raw but filled with exultation. He turned, searching for Brandon. Brandon, we did it, you bloody genius. On the wall, King Maekar Targaryen, usually stern and unyielding, felt a wave of relief so profound it threatened to buckle his knees. His face, which had been a mask of grim determination, crumpled in a mixture of awe and dawning, overwhelming relief. He saw the dead stop moving, the terrifying threat simply vanishing. He saw his own fire dragons, no longer struggling against the horn, soaring freely, their roars now triumphant. Tears welled in his eyes, unbidden, for the sheer magnitude of the victory. He raised his hand, trembling, to wipe them away. It is done, King Makar whispered, his voice hoarse with emotion, utterly unlike his usual commanding tone. By the gods, it is done. His sons, Prince Rhaegar and Prince Baelor, their faces pale, looked at each other in stunned silence, then a wave of profound relief washed over them. He did it, Prince Baelor breathed, his eyes fixed on the spot where the Night King had vanished. Brandon, he actually did it. Meanwhile, on the other part of the wall, King Rickard Stark watched with a grim, knowing satisfaction. There was no wild exultation on his face, but a deep, abiding sense of fulfillment, of ancient duty discharged. He had lived with this prophecy, this terror, for generations. Now, it was broken. He looked towards where Brandon had been, a deep, proud light in his eyes. He saw his son, a figure of silent, resolute power, standing amidst the dissolving dead. He saw the ultimate price Brandon had paid. He fought well, King Rickard whispered, his voice rough. He fulfilled his destiny. Prince Eddard Stark, his face grim, yet filled with a quiet triumph, looked out at the vanishing horror. The long night is over, he breathed. The dead are truly dead. He thought of Benjen, somewhere out there, and offered a silent prayer of thanks. The other northern lords, from Lord Skull to Lord Umber, exchanged looks of stunned disbelief, then a growing elation. Centuries of grim vigilance, of whispered fears, had culminated in this impossible victory. They let out hoarse cries of triumph, their voices echoing across the now silent plains. The roar of, "For the living," intensified, spreading throughout the encampments, relayed by telegrams to every corner of Westeros. The realm had stood on the precipice, and had pulled back. The long night had ended. But the memory of its chilling return, and the sacrifice made, would forever be etched into the very soul of Westeros. The sun began to peek over the distant mountains, casting a pale, cold light over a battlefield now covered only in shimmering ice dust. The wall remained breached, a gaping scar in its ancient face, but the ultimate darkness had been vanquished. For now, the living had won. 0 comments 0 vote. Aftermath. 292 AC. The Wall. Third person POV. Through the rapidly dissolving remnants of the dead, a battered but triumphant column began its slow, arduous journey back towards the breached wall. At their head rode Lord Robert Baratheon, his great black destrier caked in frozen gore, his armor dented, his face streaked with sweat and grime, but a wild, exultant grin splitting his face. By his side, in his normal form, rode Prince Brandon Stark, his powerful body weary, his left arm gone, but his eyes burning with a cold, victorious light. They were a spear that had pierced the very heart of darkness. The 4,000 remaining cavalry followed, their horses lathered with foam, their riders exhausted but utterly triumphant. They rode through what had minutes ago been a living, shambling horde, but was now a rapidly vanishing field of shimmering dust. The air, though still frigid, felt lighter, purer, cleansed of the ancient malevolence. As they approached the massive breach in the wall, the roar of the 30,000 soldiers atop its heights intensified. For the living, the shouts echoed across the vast expanse, taken up by thousands of voices, a spontaneous, heartfelt cheer for the heroes who had ridden into the abyss and returned. From the section of the wall where the breach had occurred, Lord Umber stood, his massive frame silhouetted against the sky, his eyes wide with awe as he watched Brandon and Robert approach. He let out a primal roar of triumph, striking his great axe against the ice. The gods be praised! The gods be praised! They did it! Lord Tywin Lannister, from the strategic tower at Castle Black, watched with a cold, almost unreadable expression, but even he felt a tremor of grudging respect. He had seen countless battles, but never a victory wrested from such impossible odds, achieved by such an audacious, desperate strike. A victory, he murmured to his aide, but one bought at a terrible price. The sight of their kings and princes, exhausted but alive, returning from beyond the grave, ignited a desperate, joyous celebration across the entire army. The victory felt absolute, profound. Cheers erupted, men wept openly, embracing their comrades. The terror that had gripped them for days, for weeks, for generations, had finally been broken. The long night was over. The immediate euphoria eventually gave way to the grim, necessary work of the aftermath. As the sun began to peek over the distant mountains, casting a pale, cold light, the true cost of their victory began to emerge. The battlefield, once teeming with life and death, was now a desolate expanse covered only in dead bodies. The bodies of the fallen soldiers and the dead, those who had bravely held the line, those who had charged into the void, littered the ground before the wall and within the camp. The vast network of engineers and supply lines, now turned to recovery, began the arduous, heartbreaking task. Orders were given to burn the dead. Funeral pyres were constructed, rising to consume the bodies of the fallen. The air soon became thick with the smell of wood smoke and burning flesh, a somber counterpoint to the earlier celebration. Each pyre was a testament to a life lost, a sacrifice made for the living. The scale of the casualties was sobering. Of the original 400,000 soldiers who had gathered at the wall, only 180,000 were now alive. More than half of humanity's assembled might had perished in the terrible, short war against the dead. It was a staggering, agonizing number, a stark reminder of how close they had come to utter annihilation. The dragons, too, had paid a heavy toll. Of the 15 ice dragons of Asgard, only 12 remained alive. 3 of the magnificent, living crystalline beasts had fallen in the brutal aerial clashes with the undead dragons, their bodies now lying cold and lifeless on the frozen plains. The Targaryen fire dragons had suffered even more grievously. Of the original 10, only 6 were now alive. 4 had been lost in the fierce, desperate battles against the corrupted versions of their own kind, their fire extinguished by the unnatural cold of undeath. Their exhaustion was evident, their scales scorched, their great bodies bearing the wounds of a terrible fight. They had mostly perished due to the sheer ferocity and relentlessness of the undead dragons, driven by the Night King's chilling will. Even the giants who had joined the living armies, those who had fought with simple, brutal courage against their undead kin, had not escaped unscathed. Several of them lay dead, their massive forms silent monuments to their sacrifice. The victory was immense, but the price had been paid in blood, fire, and ice. Hours later, as the last of the pyres blazed against the darkening sky, the inner circle of leadership gathered once more in the grim, utilitarian war room of Castle Black. The air was heavy with unspoken words, with the exhaustion and the grim realization of what they had just faced. King Maekar Targaryen and King Rickard Stark sat at the head of the table, their faces etched with the strain of leadership and the weight of the impossible victory. Around them sat their sons, Prince Rhaegar, Prince Baelor, Prince Brandon, Prince Eddard, and all the major lords. The Kingsguard commander and Wolf Pack commander stood silently, their own weariness evident. "It is over," King Maekar finally said, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. "The dead, they are truly gone." He looked at Brandon, a silent, knowing look passing between them, a profound debt acknowledged. King Rickard nodded, his own voice low. The long night, it ended as it began. With the Night King's demise. "Never," Lord Tywin Lannister stated, his voice cold and precise, cutting through the weary silence, "have I witnessed such a war. Our strategies, our tactics, our very understanding of warfare, useless against such an enemy. Numbers meant nothing. Discipline meant nothing against endless, mindless death." Robert Baratheon slammed a fist on the table, a sound of grim finality. "Gods, never seen a foe like it. No courage, no fear, no honor. They didn't even fight like men. Just moved, like a glacier of corpses. Relentless." His usual boisterousness was gone, replaced by a deep, unsettling quiet. No rest, no quarter, just cold. It was like fighting the damn winter itself. Prince Brandon Stark said, his voice chillingly calm, his eyes fixed on the empty space where the Night King had stood. He still bore the fresh, gruesome wound for his missing left arm, which was being attended to by a silent healer. They were an extension of his will. Once he fell, they fell. The puppet master cut, the strings went slack. Prince Rhaegar, his face pale, nodded slowly. Aegon's prophecy. All of it. The Night King, the long night. It was not a fable. It was a warning. Prince Aelor Targaryen, hand of the king, sighed heavily. And the Dragonhorn. To turn our own beasts against us, the thought was an abomination. Thank the gods for Prince Brandon's swift action. The dragons suffered greatly, Prince Baelor added, his voice grim. To see them, those majestic creatures, corrupted, to have them fight their own kind, it was a horrific sight. Even the living ones are exhausted, wounded. Prince Eddard Stark spoke, his voice quiet. The wall, it held, by inches. But it was breached. A scar, a constant reminder of what can happen if vigilance falters. If ancient warnings are forgotten. Prince Aberon Martell, his unreadable face now conveying a deep, reflective solemnity, broke his silence. Prophecy fulfilled. The debt is paid. But at what cost to the living? The realm is bled. Half its fighting strength is gone. A hollow victory, in some ways. No, Prince Doran, King Maekar countered, his voice firm. Not hollow. Costly, yes. Grievous. But not hollow. We survived. We faced extinction, and we prevailed. Because we stood together. South and North. Dragon and Wolf. Man, giant, and dragon. King Rickard looked at each of them, his gaze resolute. The memory of this war must never fade. The stories must be told, not as myths, but as harsh, undeniable truth. The children of Winterhold and Dragonhold, the heirs of every house, must learn from this. The vigilance must never end. He looked at Brandon, a deep, silent pride in his eyes, mingled with sorrow for his son's sacrifice. He knew the war was over. But the world had changed. And the future, though secure for now, would forever bear the scars of the long night. The meeting continued, planning the long, arduous process of rebuilding, of re-establishing security, of mourning the lost. The war was over. The long night had truly passed. But its chilling echo would forever reverberate through the history of Westeros. 0 comments 0 vote. Grand Feast. 292 AC. Winterfell. Third-person POV. The immense army, though tragically reduced, had begun the slow, deliberate process of disentangling itself from the wall. Yet, before the long march home, before the grim accounting of losses and the arduous task of rebuilding could truly begin, there was a solemn, yet joyous, imperative, to celebrate the victory, to honor the fallen, and to recognize the heroes who had saved the realm. Winterfell, the ancient seat of the kings of Asgard, was the chosen venue. Its grim, gray stones, usually a testament to stoic endurance, now shimmered with lights, draped in celebratory banners, and echoed with the sounds of life. Preparations had been swift, fueled by a collective outpouring of gratitude and relief. Every cook, every servant, every available hand had worked tirelessly to prepare a feast befitting the saviors of Westeros. The great hall of Winterfell, though vast, was packed to overflowing. Lords and ladies from every corner of the Seven Kingdoms, those who had answered the call and stood at the wall, made their way to the celebration. The golden lion of Lannister mingled with the direwolf of Stark, the stag of Baratheon brushed shoulders with the sunspear of Martell. Northern furs stood beside southern silks, their wearers united by the shared crucible of battle. The air thrummed with a profound sense of catharsis. The horror of the long night, the terrifying specter of extinction, had been banished. There was laughter, loud and boisterous, often punctuated by nervous chuckles that spoke of lingering tension. But there were also tears, shed quietly for the lost, for the unimaginable price paid. The smell of roasted boar, venison, and freshly baked bread filled the hall, mingling with the strong scent of ale and mulled wine. At the high table, seated in positions of honor, were the two kings, King Maekar Targaryen, regal and somber, and King Rickard Stark, his face grim but proud. Beside them sat their families, Queen Rhaenys and Queen Lara, their faces reflecting the mingled joy and sorrow of the day. Prince Rhaegar, Prince Brandon, and the many princes and princesses of both royal houses occupied the places of honor. Prince Brandon Stark sat at the high table, angled slightly, his face pale, but his eyes clear and resolute. His left shoulder was heavily bandaged, the sleeve of his fine doublet pinned back to hide the raw, devastating wound where his arm had been. He ate little, but observed everything, a silent, powerful presence, the living embodiment of their impossible victory. Beside him sat Princess Barbary Ricewell, her hand often resting on his knee, her love and pride evident. As the plates were cleared and the drink flowed more freely, a hush fell over the hall. It was time for the toasts, the ancient Westerosi tradition of honoring heroes and remembering the fallen. King Maekar Targaryen rose first, his goblet held high. His voice, usually stern, was now tinged with a profound solemnity. My lords, my ladies, valiant warriors of Westeros. We gather tonight not just in triumph, but in remembrance. The long night has passed. But its shadow will forever remind us of the courage and sacrifice of those who stood against it. He looked out over the assembled faces, many bearing the marks of exhaustion and grief. Let us first raise our goblets to the fallen heroes. To the 220,000 brave souls who gave their lives upon the wall and beyond. To every man, woman, and giant who fell, whose courage saved us all. Their names may not all be known to us, but their sacrifice echoes through eternity. To the fallen. A unified roar of, to the fallen, echoed through the hall, tinged with a raw, collective grief. Goblets were raised, and many drank in silence, tears flowing freely. King Rickard Stark then rose, his own face grim but resolute. And to the valiant warriors who survived. To every man and woman who stood firm upon the wall, who battled the unending tide of death. To the archers, the spearmen, the swordsmen, the defenders of mankind. Your bravery held the line. You faced the unthinkable, and you did not break. To the living warriors. To the living warriors. The hall erupted in a fierce, exultant cheer, a defiant acknowledgement of their own survival. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen then rose, his voice clear and resonant. And now, my lords, to the very spearhead of our defiance. To the cavalry army, the 10,000 brave souls who plunged into the heart of the darkness, carving a path through the endless dead. Their charge was a desperate gamble, a testament to courage beyond measure. To the cavalry. To the cavalry, the roar was deafening, particularly from the grimy, battle-hardened horsemen seated throughout the hall, their faces split by weary, triumphant grins. Lord John Arryn, ever wise, rose next. Within that charge rode the finest blades and fiercest hearts of our realm. The 40 champions who cleared the final path to the Night King. Sir Barristan Selmy, Sir Arthur Dane, Lord William Dustin, Lord Bryden Tully, Lord Roderick Forrester, Lord Jorah Mormont. And countless others, whose names will forever be etched in legend. To the champions. To the champions. The hall vibrated with the thunderous approval, acknowledging the impossible feats of the elite few. Then, King Maekar Targaryen rose once more, his gaze settling upon Lord Robert Baratheon. A genuine, almost paternal, warmth entered his eyes. And to the man who led that desperate charge. To Lord Robert Baratheon of Storm's End. A warrior of the Stormlands, whose hammer shattered the dead, whose roar rallied the living. He feared nothing, faced everything, and led us to victory. To Robert Baratheon. Robert, his face flushed with wine and triumph, gave a booming, almost embarrassed, laugh. He raised his own goblet, his eyes meeting Maekar's, a silent bond forged in the crucible of battle. For the living, he roared, and the hall roared back, for Robert Baratheon. And finally, King Maekar's voice resonated through the hushed hall, to the hero who turned the tide. To the mind that forged the path, and the hand that struck the blow. To Prince Brandon Stark. Maekar's voice roared, he rode into the heart of the enemy. He faced a madness beyond comprehension. He took the head of the madman Euron Greyjoy, and shattered the vile horn that bound the dragons to death. A collective gasp went through the hall at the revelation of Euron's death and the horn's destruction, a new layer of the victory unveiled. And then, Maekar's voice broke slightly, he faced the very embodiment of the Long Night. He fought the Night King, a foe of ancient ice and unstoppable strength. And when faced with certain defeat, when the ultimate evil was about to claim him, Maekar's voice hardened, filled with a fierce, agonizing pride. He made the ultimate sacrifice. He offered his own flesh. He lost his arm, to secure our victory. With his last strength, he pierced the Night King's heart, and broke the darkness forever. The words, stark and powerful, hung in the air. The hall erupted, not in a cheer, but in a profound, guttural roar that was part awe, part anguish, part immense gratitude. Men wept openly. Women gasped, their hands flying to their mouths. Many rose to their feet, staring at Brandon, who sat, unmoving, his face pale but resolute. To Brandon Stark, the savior of the realm. For the living, the cry was deafening, a wave of pure, overwhelming emotion that vibrated through the very stones of Winterfell. Every goblet was raised, every voice hoarse. Prince Rhaegar rose, his eyes fixed on Brandon, a man who had forged a new legend. To Prince Brandon Stark, the last hero, the realm owes him its life. The feast continued long into the night, a blend of grim remembrance and exultant celebration. The memory of the long night would forever cast a shadow, a warning of the price of complacency. But the triumph, the impossible victory, forged in fire, ice, and the ultimate sacrifice of a prince of Asgard, would forever define this new golden age. The North and South, Targaryen and Stark, now truly one, had prevailed. 2 comments 0 vote. Epilogue. AN. Thank you guys for those who have read the fanfiction. Check out my new fanposition ASOIAF, Essence of Gotcha. Blank, underscore, blank, underscore, blank. The year is 392 AC. A century had unfolded since the chilling return of the Long Night, since the impossible battle waged beneath the towering, shattered ice of the Wall. A century of peace, growth, and transformation so profound that the old world of erratic seasons and forgotten threats now seemed like a distant, half-remembered dream. The scar of the Great Breach in the Wall still remained, a grim testament to the abyss they had faced, but it was now merely a landmark, a historical marker in a vibrant, new world. Westeros, the unified continent, breathed with a predictable rhythm it had never known. The sun rose and set, the winds blew, and the rain fell, all with a newfound regularity that had reshaped the very landscape of human endeavor. The Age of Heroes, the Andal invasion, even the Targaryen conquest, seemed distant echoes. This was the Age of Unity, forged in the crucible of absolute terror and solidified by unprecedented collaboration. The greatest testament to this new age, and the most dramatic change in the political geography of Westeros, lay far to the north. The king of Asgard, the Stark dynasty, had spearheaded an unprecedented expansion beyond the Wall. No longer a desolate, haunted wilderness, the land of always winter had been slowly, painstakingly reclaimed, piece by frozen piece, by the ingenuity of man and the enduring power of the Starks. The wall itself, once a forbidding barrier, now served as a massive, ceremonial gateway. Its ancient magic, seemingly depleted by the return of the Night King, had never fully recovered its exclusionary properties, allowing fire dragons to pass freely. Sections of the colossal ice were now meticulously maintained by a much reduced, yet still vigilant, Night's Watch, serving primarily as historians and guardians of the ancient passage, guiding supply caravans and new settlers through the broad, permanent gates that had been engineered into its base. Beyond the wall, the landscape had been tamed by a relentless, century-long effort. The first settlements had slowly expanded. New roads, built with hardy, frost-resistant northern concrete and reinforced by Brandon Stark's ingenious methods, stretched across the once barren plains, connecting burgeoning villages and fledgling towns. Steam-powered carriages, far more advanced than their prototypes, now ferried people and goods between these new communities and the traditional northern strongholds. The pioneers were mostly Northmen, driven by a pioneering spirit and the promise of vast, unclaimed lands. Freehold settlements like Newkeep, nestled in the shadow of distant, newly mapped mountain ranges, and Iceford, a bustling river crossing, had sprung up. These towns, though still rugged, boasted a hardy self-sufficiency, their inhabitants farming the land with methods adapted to the unique climate, and mining the rich veins of dragonglass and other minerals that had always lain hidden beneath the ice. The Stark kings of Asgard had overseen this grand expansion with meticulous care. Prince Brandon Stark, the architect of their victory against the Night King, whose legend was already carved into the very ice of the wall, continued to guide these efforts. His tireless mind, still buzzing with inventions, had conceived new methods of heating, of sustainable agriculture in cold climates, and of efficient communication across vast distances. The ice dragons of Asgard, their numbers steadily recovering after the long night war, now patrolled the outer reaches of these new northern territories. Their magnificent forms, gliding through the frigid air, served as both guardians and guides, their ancient magic keeping the lingering wildness at bay, protecting the burgeoning settlements from anything that might still stir in the deepest, most untouched corners of the land of always winter. They were living symbols of the North's renewed dominion. Perhaps the most profound, and least understood, change was the annual change of seasons. For millennia, Westeros had suffered through unpredictable, often long winters and short, fleeting summers. This ancient pattern had governed every aspect of life, from agriculture to trade, from building to warfare. But now, it was gone. The long night's end, and the demise of the Night King, had seemingly rebalanced the very climate of the world. Now, spring followed winter, summer followed spring, and autumn gave way to winter, all with a predictable, annual rhythm. The seasons were distinct, their lengths consistent, their shifts gradual. This revolutionized every facet of Westerosi life. Agriculture, once a desperate gamble against the whims of nature, now flourished. Farmers in the Reach could plan multiple harvests, their fields yielding bountiful crops year after year. New agricultural techniques, shared from Asgard and refined at Dragonhold, allowed for greater yields and diverse crops, even in the temperate north. The threat of widespread famine, a specter that had haunted Westeros for centuries, was finally banished. Trade routes, now stable and predictable, expanded exponentially. Merchants knew when to plant, when to harvest, when to sail, when to travel. The railway network, now sprawling across the entire continent, was in constant use, ferrying goods from the verdant south to the burgeoning north, and vice versa. The concrete roads buzzed with steam-powered wagons, connecting every major town and city. Festivals and celebrations, once tied to desperate prayers for a short winter, now marked the reliable turning of the year. The King's Landing Summer Festival, the harvest feasts in the Reach, the midwinter solstice in the north, all became predictable, joyous occasions, woven into the fabric of a stable, prosperous society. The entire rhythm of human existence shifted, becoming more secure, more prosperous, more peaceful. The memory of the Long Night War, and the heroes who fought it, was enshrined in every aspect of this new age. Children learned of the Night King not as a myth, but as a chilling historical truth. They learned of the united stand, of Targaryen fire and Stark ice, of the ultimate sacrifice that saved them all. Prince Brandon Stark, the one-armed savior, was revered as the last hero, a legendary figure whose bravery and ingenuity had averted the end of the world. His dragon, Winter, though now an elder beast, was spoken of with awe. Statues of Brandon, often depicting him in his lichen form, holding Theo aloft, stood in plazas across Westeros, particularly in the north, where his sacrifice was most acutely felt. The alliance between the Targaryens and the Starks, forged in the crucible of the Long Night, had grown only stronger. The Dragon Council, now including a permanent seat for a representative from Asgard, functioned as a true governing body, a testament to shared power and mutual respect. The Targaryen fire dragons, their numbers slowly recovering, continued to be a symbol of the crown's might, patrolling the skies of the Seven Kingdoms, while the Starks' ice dragons secured the vast, expanding territories beyond the Wall. Winterhold and Dragonhold, the colleges, had flourished beyond all imagining. It was no longer merely a school for noblemen but a true center of enlightenment. Scholars from all corners of the world, including Yi, came to study its unique blend of practical governance, scientific inquiry, and ancient lore. It produced engineers, administrators, scholars, and strategists who shaped the realm, ensuring its continued progress. The Iron Throne, occupied now by King Maekar's descendants, continued to preside over a unified and prosperous realm. The lessons of the Long Night were never forgotten. The King's Guard, still strong, protected a dynasty that remembered its vulnerability, its dependence on unity and vigilance. The Lords Paramount, their houses strengthened by generations of peace and secure trade, contributed to the realm's stability. Old rivalries had faded, replaced by interconnectedness. The great houses were no longer self-sufficient, isolated powers, but integral parts of a larger, functional whole, bound by railways, telegrams, and shared prosperity. The realm of Westeros was a beacon of progress. Cities, once confined by ancient walls, had expanded outwards, their concrete roads and advanced drainage systems bringing unprecedented levels of hygiene and public health. Gas lamps, now commonplace even in smaller towns, turned night into a safe, well-lit extension of the day. The cultural tapestry of Westeros had also become richer. The predictable seasons allowed for grander, more reliable festivals, for arts and sciences to flourish with unprecedented freedom. The mingling of northern pragmatism and southern refinement, of Asgardian ingenuity and Dornish subtlety, had created a vibrant, dynamic society. Yet, despite the peace and prosperity, a silent, almost imperceptible vigilance remained. The lessons of the Long Night were etched into the collective consciousness. The occasional sighting of an ice dragon patrolling the far reaches of the New North, the Wall's enduring scar, the reverence for Brandon Stark's sacrifice, these were constant reminders that even in the brightest age, shadows could linger. The world had fundamentally changed. The ancient threats, once cyclical and relentless, had been faced and defeated. Humanity, unified and transformed, now looked towards a future built on cooperation, innovation, and a profound appreciation for the predictable beauty of annually changing seasons. The Long Night had ended, and in its wake, a new dawn had truly broken, promising an age of unprecedented peace and progress for a realm that had once teetered on the brink of oblivion. The kings of Asgard and the kings of the Seven Kingdoms, hand in hand, had built a lasting legacy. 16 comments 0 vote.